And two of the most recent that Jeff Colby did were excellent in setting out the priorities of the town. The priorities of the town are rather concise and time limited. They involve bridges and roads and things like that. Jeff was very appropriately mentioning that it was understood that freshly paved roads not dug up to install sewer pipes. You kept mentioning, Jeff, the idea that sewers are coming and the inevitability of this. I'm not sure that the people in town understand the inevitability of this. And I think this particular group has an obligation to inform and to educate. One of the things, of course, that's absolutely imperative, as the gentleman from Norton said, was that the selectmen, and by speaking of the selectmen, we refer to the administration. And what can they do? Well, they can allocate funding to educate residents. In other words, mailings, posters, stickers, the hiring of consultants who are familiar with communicating with the public. I don't know whose this is. It says, love your local water, it's a Cape Cod thing. Somebody paid for it. You know, maybe that's something we have to do. I thought this was excellent about the ticks. Okay, that came through the mail. Now, it appears that that funding was provided by the Cape Cod Healthcare. We're talking about a health issue. We're talking about the nitrates that infants are exposed to and the detrimental effects to their health from these nitrates. That's a concern of Cape Cod Healthcare. I believe the administration or this group should reach out to them. They've got some money. Perhaps someone in the DPW and the health department should have direct responsibility and make the information of the public part of the mission of those two departments. We should have more concentration on the interagency collaboration, and that should be expanded. We talk to ourselves a lot in Yarmouth. We got to start talking to people from as far north as perhaps Beverly, as far south as Providence. Just an example of that, the map that we're all familiar with, you know, that has all the lines and this one here.
Yeah.
Now this was up in Town Hall, and it was sitting on a pedestal, and hundreds of people went in to vote early and walked by this. When I first looked at it, I didn't know what it was. It wasn't labeled. It could have been the cranberry bogs of Yarmouth. Different colors and things. The effort has not been put forward to educate the public. That's it. Thank you.
Well said. Anybody else?
No, just to follow up on what Tom mentioned relative to getting the word out. In the past, we've used the quarterly water bills with, as a means of getting out to the taxpayers with specific messages. That might be
Excellent.
a good idea too.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Good job, Tom.
Since that's where the payments are probably maybe falling through, is the water bills. They're probably tied together. I
Sure,
think.
some of them want it.
I had one issue in that one of the speakers quoted two different prices per cubic foot of water. And of course, our rates will be different, but I think we need to stop talking in cubic feet, because people don't understand cubic feet, they understand gallons. You know, they see their water bill, and they see how many gallons goes through it, and tell them, your wastewater bill is gonna be a certain percentage of whatever your gallonage is. That makes sense, but I think if we're gonna quote what the Tri-Town group has done so far, we need to have accurate information, so I don't remember the exact numbers that was quoted. There was 2 different numbers quoted per 100 cubic foot or something like that. I think that needs to be squared away, so that as people look at that, they know what the right number is as a comparison to what they do.
I think that was brought up in the context that it was what the individual communities charge, and obviously that's something that Yarmouth needs to decide when we get to that appropriate point. It's easy enough in Yarmouth to be charging gallons, so we just talk cubic feet. That's pretty simple takeaway from us. I don't know what Dennis and Harwich charge for their water, whether it's on the cubic feet or the gallons. But that's not a problem for Yarmouth. We can certainly stick with gallons. That's what we currently bill at, and we can talk about in the future. There's other ways to do billing as well, so when we get to that point, we can have those types of discussions. Billing on the water usage is one. There's also flat rate systems out there as well, so not everyone cares about water usage. That's something that MFN representatives brought up. That's something they struggle with at the right time on how to bill and what to bill. And we could bill at a different rate than Dennis and Harwich as we go forward. So we can really get our decision.
Yeah, and as all three brought up, they all charge differently because it's up to the community to recover their costs.
Right, how they want to collect them.
Right. Just to put in perspective, the typical homeowner uses around 70,000 gallons a year. So.
The other thing, just a quick thought about this, is if you bill flat rate, there's no incentive to save water. So personally, I would be careful about that. I think from the economic plus the treatment, pumping, all the infrastructure we need, I don't see a big difference in design. I think in operation it could help. The less you have to move, the less you have to treat, it's better. And from an economic perspective of the customer, they're going to want to pay the least amount possible. So just quickly, I would think a gallon charge would be a better incentive to save water, or a flat rate, who cares?
That's an excellent point. It would help on both sides. We're also trying to do water conservation, so it would help with that as well. Absolutely.
Right, because you got to pump it to get it there in the first place.
Listen, but you're talking mainly about operational costs, right?
Well, you may be trying to recover some of your capital costs in your gallons, but we don't know. We're
Well-
way away from that, but there's a possibility that you're going to recover some of your capital in that gallonage charge, let's say if that's what it is, or even a flat fee.
So, I had a question for you, Dave, and you, Jeff. Do we have right now like a critical path schedule that identifies what the goal is? I know when we go to a town meeting in May, we're going to have to inform the public, somehow train them or teach them what it's all about, so that they can come and, vote on an informed basis. But we have so many little steps that we have to go through, the town itself, before we get a shovel in the ground.
Absolutely.
So I was looking at it from the perspective of if we have a schedule, that'd be great. Or if we should develop a schedule that's part of the goals in meeting that schedule, and then go from there. If we don't have a schedule, I mean, not only to get to the town meeting, but beyond.
Yes, I think that's a great thing for the committee to talk about. I know that David has put together a schedule, and I believe one of the comments at the MFN district is it might be a little too aggressive a schedule. But certainly that's something this committee should discuss and see what your support is relative to timing and schedule.
Yeah, I mean, overall, we presented at that workshop schedule for evaluating the DHY Clean Waters Community Partnership. And one of the comments was, geez, between now and then, that seems really fast. what was missing was that subgroup had been meeting monthly since June of 2017, which was 16 months prior to that person saying, well, what do you mean, between now and January? That's too quick. So, yeah, there's an education issue going on. You know, it took a while to get this committee up and running. You know, one of the things, and Kurt and I spoke about this briefly last week, I think it was, of even how frequently this committee wants to meet. You know, you're behind Dennis and Harwich. So, do you want to take your time? Do you want to catch up quickly? What do you want to do? You know, if you do go to May, then you can back up as to what you need to do. But we're here to work with the committee, and we need a lot of input from this committee in order to make decisions to get you caught up. So we clearly need the input from the committee as to what you want to do and how quickly you want to do that.
Well, I think if this thing is going to a vote at the town meeting, we have a lot to do in a very short period of time to educate them as to what the needs are and where we're going about this. Including not only the timing and the phasing and so forth, but also the cost. That's the biggest factor. I mean, people are gonna walk in and say, you're up to company and taxes, I know, not gonna go along with this deal unless you can convince me otherwise. It's really needed. So we not only have to educate them as to, okay, it's good for the environment, it's good for economic development, and, you know, and we need to do this long term because otherwise, we're gonna be nowhere, you know, economically or socially or whatever, but, you know, the question becomes, well, how much does this cost? What am I looking at? I'm gonna look at
And most people won't pay attention until you put a dollar figure in front of them so that they know what's it gonna cost them. They don't care what it's gonna cost you, it's what's it gonna cost they as an individual.
But you can't say $300 million because right away, somebody doesn't walk away. It's
I forget who I was telling the story before the meeting tonight. When we went through in Dennis, they formed a subgroup to develop their cost recovery program, which you have in front of you in your packet tonight. Happy to discuss that. It was modeled a little bit off of the one developed in Harwich. But that subgroup had a finance committee member on it who tends to be very influential, which was good that they were there as part of that subgroup. And when we got the final numbers back, because they had, they want to implement the Water Infrastructure Finance Commission, which is what's, we got information sandwiched, passed at their town meeting last week, which is modeled after the CPA. They're going to use rooms, meals tax, they're going to use some of their solar funding, and then they're going to put the rest on the tax rate. And so we did what the first couple phases of the program were to be on the tax rate, and then what the whole program was, based in today's dollars. And they sent it off to their financial advisor, who did the debt schedules of what's coming off, putting this on, 8 phases over 40 years. And when they got the numbers back, and we had that subgroup meeting, that finance committee member just looked at me and goes, "Are these the real numbers?" I said, "Yeah, I didn't generate them, and these are back from your financial advisor, and this is what it was." And it was about $150 on his tax rate for a 300,000 assessed home for the first 2 phases, and about $350 tax increase as an average through the whole program. With a few spikes, but on average 350. And he looked at me and goes, "I'm going to spend less than $1,000 to do this program?" I said, "Well, I don't know what your house is assessed, but these are the values." And he goes, "I thought I was spending over $10,000 on this." So you need to develop what your finance plan is, and then we need to get those numbers out so people actually react to hard and fast numbers, not the perception that is clearly out there today. And the perception is, yeah, this is such a costly program, I can't afford it. Well, we use the analogy, and we've done the cost for Harwich and Yarmouth, as to what your water system costs. Both communities implemented their water system roughly over a 40-year program. And what do you think the value of your water system is today? It almost equates exactly to the proposed cost of what implementing your wastewater program is. So you've already done this. And most people would say, I couldn't do without my municipal water today. I look at that as, you know, a given in my daily life. And yet, they paid for it along the way, multiple means of paying for it. It wasn't one system that they set up on day one and it ran for that 40-year program. Yeah, it changed. But they started and then they modified along the way. So I would say, you know, look at that as you've already accomplished this in one fashion. Now you're going to tackle your next utility. But again, we need input from you folks. Some of the things we're going to talk about tonight is, you know, the phasing program, so that we can then put together the phasing, update the cost, see if the program that had been put together before still makes relative sense, at least the first couple phases. Guaranteed phase 7 and 8 will be different than we're all sitting here today, but we need a plan, and then we can generate those costs, which will be then your next most difficult task, to generate a cost recovery program. I mean, the town staff has been wonderful in the last few years, generating all different types of options to do that. And I'm sure they'll be able to put it back out on the table for you to consider. But that's the process that needs to be done, and it's a matter of how quickly you want to tackle those items.
That was my point, was I think that I took from it is that we're on a very short time frame to get this done. So I think that we do need to get focused on making some decisions specifically about the phasing and the funding. And I agree that the funding is going to be the #1 topic. If we don't have that finalized, or if we can't speak to that, I don't think it's going to go anywhere. So I think we really need to get focused on making some decisions and moving quickly. I don't think that meeting once a month, this advisory board is going to
Get it
be
done.
enough. So that's just my thought, because I don't think that that's.
And I think right now, in my mind, part of what's driving this is we all have the state map of what their projects are going to be over the next 8, 10 years, whatever it may be. So it would seem to me we need to focus on the North Main Street Route 28 intersection. Seems like the first thing's going to happen. And then the Vassar Bridge next, and then the rebuilding of Route 28. So it would seem to me maybe we need to put something in front of May of this year to address the first 2 parts of that, which is getting over the bridge and getting through that intersection, whatever engineering needs to be done. I don't know if you could put a number to construction or anything close to it, we could, again, use an estimate to make public.
Yeah, actually, one of the items that we have for discussion under the phasing topic is that map that we put together with Jeff's help and Tom Andre and Dennis and the folks from MassDOT, which goes through those projects, and we'll be happy to go through those when we get there.
I've been talking to my neighbors and various folks since I've been involved with this group, and I detected a few, I think what I would loosely label as missing links in the chain. People are asking immediately, where is it going to go? And one of the conclusions I've reached is that I think the map as presented needs a little help. People that live on or near the water automatically expect that the pipe will come to their house. And there's a number of places where that's not happening in the map. People on the north side are concerned from a slightly different perspective. They know they're going to be asked to pay for it, and it's not going to be there. And it occurs to me that maybe from a economic analysis point of view, the more the burden is spread through the town, the more people benefit directly from the service, the more willing that they're going to be to contribute. So, even though it may not absolutely be necessary, I'm not an engineer, I'm just kind of listening to the folks. Might be worth taking another look at some of the areas omitted. I sense some urgency. There's different reasons for the urgency. Some people just want to get it done as much as possible. Other people think the Yarmouth's behind other towns on the Cape, whatever that equates to. I sense that some people think maybe the disruption, the economies of scale suggest that getting on with it is the lesser evil. And then lastly, the cost issues. As was said, without a real number, it's hard for people to react. I've thrown out some numbers, and they're just based on the conversations that have happened. I've been surprised a couple of folks that I thought would be instantly on board were cringing a little. On the other hand, with education, I think that this is saleable. I do think from other things I've been involved with over the years, need a huge public relations effort between now and May at the speed of light if this is going to get through town meeting. Because I suspect there are some people that are, regardless of what is presented, they're not going to be happy. So the more, if you will, the body politic, the townspeople can be educated, and it's a little harder to do in the winter when some of the people that will be asked to pony up on here are away. The word gets around, and so I think getting, I don't know what the right word is, campaign, program, underway as soon as possible. Good idea. Thanks.
And I also think, oh, go ahead, Roger.
Well, one thing, you guys, everybody's brought up good points and good talk going into all of it, which is fantastic. One of the things that I'm running into, and it's because of a couple of reasons, but people aren't, I think as a unit, this committee has to all agree that what kind of plan we're going to go through. We're going through Big Pipe, Dennis, Harwich, that way, or, because what I'm hearing is, well, come on, what are you talking about? What about these walls you put in the ground, and he's got these septic systems, and that the Woods Hole group has to go out and put it on social media and everything, and they're very well respected, that they're working with Barnstable and Falmouth, some other places, talking to them about, yeah, we're going to look at alternative septic systems. And I'm like, oh. And so I looked into it, and sure enough, there it was out there. And then it comes on to all the radio stations that they're suggesting. Now, unfortunately, it doesn't get reported what they say, right? And what they're suggesting is in certain areas, they're going to think about this. But the perception out there to the common person is, okay, it's going to be a lot cheaper if we just update our septic system and walk away. What they don't understand. So I think as a group, we need to first agree that, yeah, we're going with this. And we're going to pipe it, and we're going to do it the right way, because it's the only one that really works, as we've seen in all the studies and all the science that's been done. And this isn't recent. This has been going on for 20 years.
Generation.
Yeah, so this isn't new. This isn't the first time, as you guys know, that we're on the committee last time. This isn't the first time we've seen this. So we have to agree on that, is for one thing, for sure. And then, so when people start pushing these other ideas of what they hear out there, you got to say, look, there's the science, this proves, and it's going to cost you more in the end, because what you don't hear is that when you do this, you get an LSP for life, a licensed site professional. So once those babies go in, they don't read, it's real easy. So, just as a comment, I'm pretty sure we're all on board with it, but I think we need to know that.
And I think, again, part of that message has to be about what it costs to have an IA system on your property. The fact that it'll work right without a regular flow through them. That in some of these areas, you can put an IA on every single property, it's not gonna remove enough nitrogen to make a difference. It's still gonna, you know, you may still have a race system in your front yard. You know, one of the points made somewhere was that with sewers, you get to keep your yard. Where if you either have a regular Title V or you have an IA system, you're putting a big foundation in your front yard or your backyard and you're losing half your property. On the other side of it, if there was a potential for more development, say, okay, we have sewers in certain areas, you could add an extra bedroom, now you preserve that land area, we could actually do that. Because that
Yeah, lots of
helps the
good
people,
reasons.
helps the tax base, all that, so.
But I was just saying, I just want to make sure that this committee is all agreed on one path here.
Yeah.
We're not
Rob,
going-
you raise a very good point, and that point is, I'll guarantee you're gonna come up right to the minute you go to town meeting, no matter what fabulous education program you put out there. So here's the simple response. If you look at that map and you look at what percent of the septic system nitrogen removal you need to remove, you see most of those are above 50%, right? And an IA system, they're being tested all the time, multiple systems up at Barnstable County Public Health. They will remove down 35 parts of nitrogen down to about 19 parts. And that's the criteria. And that's if they're operated on a constant basis, constantly fed, meaning year-round homeowner, not a seasonal homeowner who comes and uses their home for 3 months a year.
And I think
It's not like you flip the light switch. So you could put it on every lot and get 50% removal, and what are you gonna do? You're not gonna meet the total max daily load limits that you now have, which is what those percentages reflect. But to answer that, we put together a brochure for Harwich. It's in your packet, and it answers 3 solutions. One, what's the cost if you're gonna be connected to a sewer? 2, what's the cost if you remain with a non-site Title V septic system? And 3, what's the cost if you put an innovative alternative system in? Because we answered this because that's the DEP letter, which I think you've also seen, which says that if the town doesn't move forward with a municipal system, they are going to change the Title V regs, which they've already started meeting to make those revisions, and declare nitrogen-sensitive areas in every one of those watersheds, every home. Not the ones we've selected to be sewered, every home. And so this is the cost. And if you look at this, we've had this check, these costs come right out of the Cape Cod Commission's cost alternative guidebook. It's 3 times more costly to the homeowner to do their innovative alternative system, and you still don't get there. And these costs are gonna be very similar to what you're gonna see in Yarmouth, even though it's the Howard brochure. So that's the answer. But you're gonna constantly hear
So I gotta
that.
get it, but you're right.
I could just say one thing. I've only been on the planning board for a little over a year. Tom can back me up. Right now, we're talking about trying to increase housing for workforce housing and other opportunities. One of the things that's coming through the planning board right now is a new regulation that allows people to add on a mother-in-law apartment or a small 800 square foot accessory apartment or house on a lot. We've already determined that unless you're thinking about large lots, which are not going to cover a big area, you're not going to be able to do with a standard septic system on every lot, not to serve all this, because you have to expand the septic system and it's just isn't enough land area. That's one thing. But probably more important is our commercial, our economic development of our commercial areas with these large systems that they have, these hotels, motels, all of this local tourist housing, if you will, during the tourist season and even beyond, they can't grow. In fact, we have, if you drive up and down Route 28 right now, you can see the lapidation. The commercial owners of those properties are not going to reinvest money into upgrading those facilities without a sewer system. It's too expensive, and it's very limiting as to how much they can't add any more rooms. We're looking at a commercial area that is slowly dying. And that is the tax base in Yarmouth. That's the major tax base. So, and we're competing against other towns. Now, if other towns, like Barnstable already has sewers, Dennis is gonna move forward, Harwich is gonna, we're competing with them. Whether you like it or not, we are competing with them for all the commercial trade that comes to us on a seasonal basis and beyond. We can't continue to service them by forcing them to have on-site septic systems, on-site wastewater systems that cost so much money. And, you know, with new regulations coming in and trying to reduce all that nitrogen that's going in the ground from these huge septic systems that serve these hotels and hotels. They're doing nothing but destroying the environment and eelgrass and everything. That's always been demonstrated in the studies. And if you looked at that, I don't know how many people here in the committee have had a chance, but if you look at that study that was done by that group,
Donahue Institute.
Donahue Institute, I mean, that tells you in a nutshell. We really don't have a choice. Now, one choice we have is we try to prioritize our commercial and industrial areas and don't worry about the residential areas in the beginning. And then later on, and I think you're gonna look at it through your phasing plan, that there are some sensitive areas that are really having a significant impact, like over in the Willis Bay area, all the residential there and some of the ponds around there. So I think Yarmouth does not have a choice. We have to do it. It's just a matter of how do we convince the people. And I think, wasn't there something about some of these nitrogen sensitive areas are now at 5% nitrogen?
You might be thinking of the bypass.
Well, yeah, I think a lot of communities have established a goal, where the Cape Cod Commission has, of 5 milligram per liter of total nitrogen versus the current groundwater discharge standard is 10.
Right.
Yeah, and that's the drinking water standard.
Right. So where are we on that scale right now in some of these areas? I mean, are we at 5 parts per million?
Well, actually, you have 2 drinking water wells that are up over 5 that I don't believe the town uses, because you've shown a 30-year trend of increasing nitrogen because of the density of development in the contributing area to those wells. But I don't know, Mr. Chairman, maybe that's a good segue into discussing your economic development.
Yeah, and one of your comments, though, you don't want to pit the business versus residential on this. Unfortunately, it happened last time. We have to make people understand that phase 1, whatever length it is of Route 28, is the trunk line that picks up the businesses and the residential at some point. So, because one of the comments that happened before was, well, if the businesses want it, let them pay for it. The problem is the businesses are willing to pay for it. They understand this better than some of the citizens of the town. But a system that's just limited to businesses is not, from an environmental standpoint, is not going to make it.
No, I agree.
But we have to make
But
that
if
clear,
you're-
that
but
just
you're-
because this is Route 28, it's not just a business.
But if you're a taxpayer, okay, and you know that these motels are not doing as well as they used to, and we need an upgrade,
Yeah.
okay? If you lose that tax base, guess who's gonna pick up the tab?
They already are,
Yeah.
residential, yeah.
Which is what I thought was, well put in here.
So, I guess we can move on to the report, because I think it has a ton of little items we can use. And I talked to Karen and Rich last week, and asked a question about something, and it turns out that one project actually put a blip in one of these graphs all by itself. So imagine if we could create true economic development in this town. You can't, I don't think you can quantify it yet, but at some point as you move forward, you could take A, the increase in meals tax and rooms tax, and B, the increase in new growth and help pay for this. But we need to get phase one, and again, we have to remind people, you can't just vote for the pipe or vote for the plant, we need both.
So, Mr. Chairman, if I might, just to emphasize your point, and on a couple of people's points with economic development being a key part of this, just to preface your presentation of this, the go-through of this report, pages 14 and 15 are where you're referring to. And I'll give you a little bit of a primer to the extent you want it or need it. On our property tax, I think everybody realizes every year we can go up under Mass general laws 2.5% of our tax levy. But what a lot of people don't realize is you also get to add on top of that 2.5% a factor for what's called new growth, which is essentially any new development that gets put in place in the prior year and gets added to your levy. And so you'll see in here on page 14 and illustrated on the graph on page 15, is that our new growth in Yarmouth is 0.77% of our levy. And it compares us to some other communities. We'll use the state average, which is the green line on the chart. You can see that new growth, if you look in 2017 or 2018, is over 2% on average. And for our peers, our neighboring peers, not quite as good as the state average, but those are state Cape Cod communities. In any event, they're over between 1% and 2% on average. In any event, better than Yarmouth. Yarmouth is the laggard in that comparison. So, to the chairman's point, if you look on this chart in 2015, you see that orange line at the bottom, and then it goes up quite a bit, and almost to 1%. And we think that was a one economic development project.
It was Mill
Mill
Hill Club coming into the Alzheimer's facility.
Added a significant amount of investment to into the community and to the tax base. And so that's how.
That wasn't even a big
Well,
project.
That was Mill
Well,
Hill.
that was a pretty big project. I
Was
mean,
that
I think it
Mayflower
was
together?
$26 million.
Yeah.
Say again?
That was Mayflower's expansion.
That was
and
Mayflower's
Mill-
expansion and the
No,
redevelopment of
residences.
the Mill Hill Club.
Yeah.
Combined properties, yeah.
Right. And that only that didn't include, they have not finished out their planned improvements, which included additional housing up on the Buck Island Road side of things. This is just what you're looking at on Route 28.
So it's 30 million.
Yeah, I think it was 26.
So 30 million roughly of economic development. That one project shows that blip. Normally, without something like that, we're looking at renovations of existing housing stock that drives our new growth, which means we're at basically 0.5% in any normal year. So that's not sustainable. So when you get to the point on your agenda here about cost recovery, there might be a discussion of what can you do if sewers is to push new growth forward to higher levels than what we've previously seen. Perhaps some of that could be utilized to pay for some of it. That's a concept that you should have a discussion.
And another part of the report that I picked up on is even though we have pretty much more motel rooms than almost anybody, they're underperforming rooms.
Right.
So again, if we can get the investment in these rooms to the point where they actually rent more nights, that's more money in the town's pocket. And it can improve their nightly rate as well. So even in a given number of nights of rental, if the rate goes up, again, our revenue goes up. If we can get more nights out of the same property, our revenue goes up. If people are here to stay in the rooms, they're gonna eat in our restaurants and our revenue goes up. So, and the tax rate revenue goes up as well.
And just a related point, and I can tell you, for those of you that I haven't met, I'm Karen Green. I'm the Community Development Director in town, and so we oversee a lot of the land use regulations, the planning type things. And something, it's amazing how many times developers will come into the office and they'll have an idea, or they're interested in a property, and they don't even know that we don't have sewer. And then when you drop the bomb that you've got a septic system, they, you don't really hear back from them too much. But just to Lee's point, that the owners, we want the owners to reinvest. We want that to happen for sure. But what we also want to do is attract investors, and attract investors who have the capacity to make these larger scale developments happen. And another point, and hopefully we'll see a blip, is with another motel property, and through kind of incentives through the Affordable Housing Trust, the Cavalier turning into Dakota Properties, Yarmouth Green, that will add a little bit. It will also add other tax burdens, or service burdens. But those are important points, and I think I think that the main takeaway from this report is really what happens if you don't do this, and I think that just the further decline is inevitable.
I also believe that if we don't do this in this 5-year time frame, that if we wait till 2030, forget it. From an economic perspective.
Well, the EPA is not going to let us go that long.
No, but at that point, as that business tax base continues to erode,
Oh, yeah.
and the residential tax
agree.
base picks up more and more of it,
Well, the Christmas tree shop just left.
Right.
well, I guess that
We're
was...
here now.
And to that point, if on page
And
14,
That's what I'm saying.
page 14 of this report illustrates that pretty well. It
Yeah.
shows the decline in the assessed value of commercial property. And just on a hard and fast round numbers, this isn't perfect. I might have the years off a little bit, but I remember doing this back in 2014 or 15 at the last go around. We looked at the assessed value of commercial properties back in the year, I think it was 2000, or maybe it was, so it would have been 15 years prior, back in the year 2000. And roughly it was around the 20% of total valuation of the town. Nowadays, we're under 10%. So just in that
7%.
Right, so in that 15, 20-year period, we've declined, the assessed valuations of all property in town, commercial to residential, has shifted larger to the residential base. Just indicating what this chart shows pretty well is the value of the decline of the commercial values in town. So you might say that, residents might say, well, maybe the commercial tax base should pick up more of it. Well, maybe they should, and you'll discuss that. But on the other hand, they already are paying it for doing nothing. The tax burden is shifting to the residential taxpayer.
That's the point that needs to be made to them.
Right.
It's been doing that for years.
For years, yeah.
Incrementally.
And if you look at between the empty places, the underutilized places, and I'm not going to knock the nonprofits because they're good in this town, but half of your commercial, I don't say half, but quite a bit of your commercial property that is occupied by nonprofits right now.
One of the takeaways that the people in Dennis focused on when they had a companion study done is summarized on page 19. And that was from other communities with reinvestment. And if you just look at those 4 bullets, for every dollar invested in the wastewater infrastructure, you get $15 return in private investment, $2 return in public investment, $14 added into your tax base, and every $10,000 in construction results in 6 jobs. So if you're looking for reinvestment, as indicated earlier, to reinvest in the hotel so that it becomes more year-round than a seasonal hotel, so you get more rentals throughout the year and get the rooms and meals tax base back, they have to do that private investment to do it. So that's what these studies are based on. That's not Dennis, that's not Yarmouth, that's proven history of what's happened when you do these systems.
How did, if I can ask Dave a question, how did Dennis use this study? Once they finalized the study, then what?
They went back and evaluated what they had included for projected flows in their commercial areas, and they ended up increasing from 1.7 million that they needed to address their nitrogen issue and what they had allowed for. They added another 250,000 gallons to allow for that smart growth to occur in their commercial areas, mainly the Route 134 and some of the 28 area.
Was that based on a percentage of what they're currently using, or was it just an arbitrary?
They went back, met with their planner, looked at what they had assumed for build-out when they had done, given the information to the MEP study. Look at proposed zoning changes that they want to bring forward. Not that they're there today, but they think over the next 10 years that they can get through. And allow for that, and they didn't pick the peak because that would have added another 1 million gallons.
Right.
They wanted to handle something that they felt, you know, again, that they could sell, but yet allowed for that development. You know, they want to, same as you, encourage more workforce housing, affordable housing, all those things.
So we're kind of in the same boat at this point.
Yeah.
Because we haven't done our build-out, we haven't revised the build-out in a long time. We've had zoning changes take place. Lee, you mentioned the ADU, the accessory dwelling units. If we do something there, we might want to take care of that. So.
You know, another thing I noticed that's not really related to the Donahue report, but on the phasing, where it looks like part of South Shore Drive has been removed, from an economic perspective, I think that needs to be included.
Put it in.
And I also have a sense that there's a small area there behind South Shore Drive, if I read this correctly, that is also not included, but my sense at some point these neighborhoods might want to say, you know what, we're willing to pay to get in on this thing, because we have a lot of these small lot, high water table issues that other areas have too. So I don't know how we account for that without over-engineering this system.
Well, that was in under your original plan back in 2011. Just through discussions the last 5 years internally, looking at cost, there was a revision made to take that out because that's what's referred to as a direct
To the sound, right?
Yeah.
This area right here is not part of the Bass River watershed or the Parkers River watershed. It's what's known as a direct discharge, meaning water from that home flow directly out into Nantucket Sound. So it's not into an impaired water quality estuary, which the Bass River is and the Parker River area is. Same with Lewis Bay. So that was taken out, but it was originally in, as was the whole South Shore Drive here. So that's what we need input, and that's what I was getting at earlier. In order for us to cost out your phasing and what's included in your plan, we need input from you folks as to whether they should be in or out.
Well, I can tell you this, trying to sell it to people that are in the phasing, and the people that say, well, I'm not even in it, what's my problem? I mean, you start talking to people on the north side, and they understand, you know, we're not part of it, but we're going to have to pay for it.
It's part of the greater good.
It's part of the greater good. My house is going to be, you know, there's a lot of economic benefit, there's a lot of good as far as living in this town. But if you start getting those people down on Aiken Ave and tell them that their neighbor down the street on Crosby doesn't have to, it's not going to be good. So to me, I mean, that area of town, heck, there's parts of that area of town that are underwater probably this weekend. So just,
Yeah, like Vineyard Garden or all that area.
you got it.
Of interest might be, how do we tie health and clean water to what's coming out of your pocket to pay for this? And I don't mean scare tactics. I mean
Realistic costs.
sensible, realistic costs. It scares me that we have a single source aquifer on the Cape. Every time we flush our toilets, it goes into the aquifer, and there's one.
And you don't know what individually businesses and residential are pouring down the drain.
Absolutely
That's
not.
going into the groundwater table.
Our
Pharmaceuticals.
wells are being polluted, our watersheds, our sewers. There has to be a health consideration here.
Well, you know what I tell everybody? Environmental reasons is the primary driving force behind this. The economic development benefits, whatever, are a fringe benefit of this. That's how I try to sell it. Economically and not, the reason I mention the economic development side, because I think it helps pay for it.
Yeah.
Not that necessarily you do it for economic development, you do it for environmental reasons, but I think if we get a decent return on our hotel and restaurant and increase that part of the tax base, it helps everybody else. You know, they can help pay for it.
I think that people do it for different reasons.
They do.
I think that economic might speak to one person, environmental might speak to somebody else, and something else might speak to somebody else entirely.
And I think historically, like Rob said, towns that have gone to sewers have seen an increase in their property values. Generally, whatever's going to be spent by a homeowner in this program, or even a commercial business person, they're going to get that money back when they go to sell their property at some point.
Oh, yeah.
I think part of the conversation has to be, let people know that it's mandatory. We have to do this.
But they didn't believe it last time.
Yeah.
How do they believe it this time?
I think the window is getting short.
Mandatory, yeah, the
Absolutely.
problem with that,
I don't know.
I mean, every time I see Brian Dudley, I say, what are you doing?
Tom, the problem with the mandatory is that a lot of people are just defiant. If you say that to them, they're gonna say, let's go to court, you know? I mean, we understand, hey, you know, if the town gets tied up in court for a lot of years, I mean, the only guys that are making out are the lawyers, you know, but if you were to threaten them with it.
That's why I go back to this brochure. This was the most effective brochure in helping sell the program in Harwich.
This go up to
Because this
everybody?
allowed people to make their decision. Do you want to be on a sewer, or do you want to have an IA system? Because if you're in one of those three areas and you have to do something, you make the decision. You want 3 times the cost, or do you want the municipal system?
Everybody get a copy of this in Howard.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
What resources do we have to pay for this printing?
We can work with the town and do that.
The
We
administration-
could do some more brochures that we've done, and
Yeah, to answer that question, the last 2 years of town meeting, you probably all remember, we've had $200,000 approved in wastewater funding. That's not all the KCDM Smith. A good part of that is, and they've helped us along, but a portion of that is for public outreach, education. There's a fair amount that we have available to us to print brochures.
And we do have electronic media, which is largely free, so we get the brochure developed, we can push it out on the town's Facebook page, we can do YouTube videos that people can watch even if they're not here, if they're in Florida. We have a Twitter that, you know, is starting to generate a following, and so you might reach some people that traditionally we haven't reached, and we could still send it out in the tax bills or as a separate mailing. So those are all things we can do, but we're, you know, just getting the ground floor here, so. Mr. Chairman, if I may, on this item number 3 here, I think the Donahue Institute is waiting for we received or will be receiving our feedback on some points of clarification or some comments. I think it's ready to be finalized, pending any further comment from your committee. And so at whatever point you think you're ready, we can contact them, give them our feedback, and we can finalize this report. And I would suggest is that we could utilize the information contained in this report and prepare maybe an executive summary or at least an itemization of some of the key points that we could provide back to the group here, that you might use in your future outreach.
Is today's copy of the economic opportunity report the same as what we got before, or does
Yes.
it include staff comments?
It's the same.
yes, no, they're waiting for comments. We've passed along, we received some from Karen Green, and she got some from others as an initial pass. But we said the committee was meeting tonight to see if we needed any more, and then we would get back to them with any final comments so that they can finalize
I am curious what staff comments were.
Yeah, I have to look them up.
it. It was more editorial words.
They're not big
No substantial
substantive.
things.
Wasn't
It was
contest.
a major.
No.
All right.
I was gonna ask what was the next step for this. So that was the
Have
next-
answered, huh?
I thought it was, I thought it was, to her point about it does hit both sides of it. You know, why we're doing it environmentally, why, and what benefits are going to be, you know, economically, so that was my question is, and, you know, I guess the other question is, as you said, we would take certain things, I mean, this is, they're not gonna read this.
Yeah, I'm thinking maybe a one pager we could pull together of just key points and
Mhm.
uh,
And
use
then I'll
use
link to
that
this if they
to.
wanted to go to the, you know, to the whole
Right.
document and read it. or-
And again, it's hard to nail down the benefits of implementing these, what's in this report. But I think, and that's where I look at it in stages, I think if we could get through phase one and the plant, let's say for starters, and then work on, it may be a different financing model moving forward as we see what the economic development benefits are along Route 28, that, again, whatever the selectmen's policy becomes as far as committing a percentage of new growth, a percentage of the rooms and meals tax, maybe some other things, you know, then it could take the burden off the general taxpayer, I think, going forward. It may be a lot more palatable to people, but we don't know that yet. I know Dennis's, one suggestion was we bring some other towns in to talk to us about what their cost recovery ideas have been, and maybe give us some ideas. I know one of Dennis's, obviously, is that they've got a solar field that they can take some of that income, put it towards that. And again, this one fund that we may propose soon.
I think that's a good idea, because I think a lot of these towns have already done some of that, and we can learn from like we did from the.
And some that are already in operation, see how it's worked for them too, what they're doing.
Right.
Mr. Chairman, there was a couple of things that came through. One, in an email from the town offices saying something about the article about sandwich, and how they're going along with adding a 3% surcharge.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's on the list.
Maybe we can talk about that under item
Yeah, that's
6.
on the
uh,
list, yeah.
So do we, I guess, as a committee, do we want to wait a little bit longer to bless this report? Or does anybody think they have any further comments that should be added into this or passed along to town staff?
It didn't have any substantial comments on it, I thought it was, pretty well written, yeah.
There's a bunch of points I picked out that I think, like Rich said, let's make a bunch of bullet points and move forward. Instead of saying, here, read this,
Yeah.
give them a couple pages and say, here's what it shows, here's what could potentially be the benefits of implementing this in a monetary.
Yeah, when we first got this, it didn't have an executive summary, so we had sent it back to have them put the executive summary in, because that's what 90% of the population will read. But clearly, you know, you need to figure out what you think the key points are for the town of Yarmouth in reading this. So, but that can be added as you post it on your website or pass it out or.
Yeah, it wouldn't be part of this report, just be something that we would put together that this committee,
Right.
you know,
Yeah.
thinks is.
Is it something, if people
Yes.
have any suggestions on that, if there's the big points you'd like us to consider, you could send them, we'll just keep you as the funnel bridge?
Sure.
We could just send them to Rich.
Well, as I always suggest, I would say submit them to the chair and perhaps copy me, and then I'll make sure the rest of the staff gets them.
Sorry,
And always with the cautionary tale of do not copy, you know,
don't
Don't
respond.
go back and forth with
committee, you know, majority of the committee members,
Right.
a quorum of the committee members, so we don't want to be deliberating.
And another thing I was going to comment on when I started reading this report too was where's the numbers? But if you take some of these graphs and then go to the back of the report, there's a lot of numbers. You can actually look at numbers, not just the graph, but the numbers as they've changed in these different categories, which I think may be helpful too, moving forward. All right, so does anybody feel or want to make a motion that we bless this report as it is and send it back to the town? I guess is it gonna go back to Donahue Institute?
Yes.
For final? Okay.
I make a motion, we adopt it, or approve it for their finalization, subject to any
Comments by staff?
comments by staff or consultant.
Second.
Any more discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Great. Okay. So, review draft phasing plan is next on our list.
And just to give you a brief background of how we got to where you are today. This shows the Lewis Bay watershed, which comes into Lewis Bay, you share with Hyannis, Barnstable. You have the Parkers River watershed, which is all within the town of Yarmouth. You have the Bass River watershed, which you share almost 50-50 with the town of Dennis. And then up above is Chase Garden Creek, Alex Pond, which flows up into Barnstable Harbor. So you share that with Barnstable. But that flows to the north, so that MEP, Mass Estuaries Project report, was just issued. I think we discussed this briefly. That goes up in a very marshy area up in here. So that's actually what's known as a nitrogen sink, meaning it can take a little bit more nitrogen. And in part it goes up into the bay, which has significantly more flushing than down in any of these estuaries or even in the Nantucket Sound. So you don't have to remove nitrogen in our watershed. If you go to, this is just to reflect again, most of the nitrogen we're focusing on, the three controllable sources are septic systems, the nitrogen leaving septic systems we call wastewater. But we can't forget, as we develop your overall plan, the fertilizer and stormwater component. The town, DPW, is working on a stormwater plan for the whole town. But we also should consider a fertilizer education program, because both of those contribute roughly 7 to 8%, so it adds up to 15%. But the main focus is the 85%. And as we showed this earlier, see, this shows the whole Lewis Bay, significant portion in Barnstable, but a lot of this is already sewered. You're not sewered here, so we need to remove 80% of the nitrogen coming from the septic systems in that watershed. 96%, but that drops because you're in the process of widening this bridge, which increases the flushing through here. Drops down to 67%, I think it is.
67, 68,
Somewhere around there, which is good news. But also, we're looking at the potential of this recharge site, as we refer to the Buck Island Road site. That's where your in-town treatment plant for your in-town solution, if you don't join the DHY partnership, it was locating the treatment plant, and the treated effluent would also be recharged there. So we have to account for that additional nitrogen in the effluent. So that's a nitrogen balance. And if we bring more, if we do bring Lewis Bay, which we'll talk about, over to Barnstable, we bring more effluent back, we need to look at how much nitrogen is in that effluent too. And then we're looking at roughly 60% of the nitrogen coming from septic systems in the Bass River watershed. So that then equates to, this was the plan recommended in 2011, which showed the phasing. We had this in 5 phases. John, this did show the whole area being done, to answer your question. And then so the focus, and this has been designed, this green area with the treatment plant here and the recharge here, so we picked up some of the residential. But again, the focus, this was like, think of it as the spine. This was the main pipe, and all these areas south would feed up into it, and north would feed down into it through looking at different types of collection systems, which we also need to discuss. So this is the current plan. What we did is, because back in 2011, we didn't have the Bass River, Massachusetts Estuaries report, so we were mainly focused south of Route 6. But now, in order to meet that percent removal, we have a fair amount of homes that will be sewered north of Route 6. Again, the focus has been on trying to pick higher density areas so that we collect more homes with that nitrogen, so we do it in a more cost-effective manner. So that's why you see typically the areas south, the higher density, versus some of the areas north not selected. Doesn't mean if you're in that watershed, you're still not contributing your share of nitrogen to the issue in that watershed. But so we've taken this and stretched it to 8 phases, roughly 1 phase every 5 years. And in discussion with staff over the last 3 to 4 years, the phasing was modified, and instead of phase 1 being from the bicycle line to Parker's River, it was actually extended all the way to the Dennis line along Route 28. And this is roughly what that phasing plan resulted in. Larger flow in that first phase. Shows number of house connections. Now it's a larger flow, but fewer connections. So that needs to be factored into your financing plan. What's that tell you? You've got your larger water users, because it's mainly the commercial hotels, motels. So versus, a little bit more flow, but 2,300 people being connected. So that depends on how you go about looking to do your financing plan. Next. So what we did is we took the plan that we just showed you for Yarmouth. We looked at the 8 phasing plan for Dennis, and we modified the Harwich plan and turned that into 8 phases, and redid some of their phases to create one plan should the DHY Clean Waters Community Partnership come about. Connecting over potentially to a main pumping station here at Route 28 and 134. Harwich would feed over and come into that. And then the partnership would own either that pumping station and the force mains come up to the treatment plant, and then recharge effluent back to multiple sites in all 3 towns. We're also, as part of that evaluation, looking at collecting flow in the Lewis Bay area and conveying it in different options over to the Hyannis treatment plant as a subset, instead of you conveying all your flow over to Dennis, because 70% of your cost, plus or minus, is in your collection system. You will always be in control of that, whether you do your in-town solution or you join the DHY Clean Waters Community Partnership. Biggest cost program, you will always be in charge of. So that's the collection and how you choose to do it. So in further looking to try to minimize your cost, this is also the farthest away from the Dennis plant, so therefore it's the most costly for you to convey to Dennis and then bring back. So what we're looking at, and sort of follows the Harwich model, where in East Harwich, that will go to the Chatham treatment plant, farthest away from Dennis again. We're looking at whether it's cost effective for you to send this over to Hyannis, share that treatment plant, bring your effluent back, and bring some Hyannis effluent back, because they're looking for effluent recharge sites. They have a lot more treatment capacity than they can use now, or they're going to use for many years out. They're looking for effluent recharge, which they don't have right now. You have that asset at the Buck Island Road site, so there may be a good match there. And then we've also met with the Mass Department of Transportation. As Kurt mentioned, there's some programs that are already beginning. If you look at this, and I believe there's a figure in your handout, there's roughly 1 project starting every year for the next 5 years. They're off and running, and some of these projects are major. The Dennis Port area has already begun. So if you look at these, each of these boxes, the way it works is it tells you when the project is starting. It starts in fall 2018. It just started. It's a 2-year construction period, so it'll finish in 2020. And then the way MassDOT works is they put a 5-year moratorium on opening up that street. So you're blocked out from putting anything in that street if you don't meet their time frame window. The good news is, if we can line you up to dovetail in with some of these projects, such as, well, the Parkers River Bridge is sort of a separate entity, but this program over here, that stretch that we've already designed the sewer for, they're proposing to do a design in 2022, start construction in 2023. If you can line up, you pay for the pipe, they're gonna do all the other construction, because they're gonna do the road anyway. They're widening the road, they're putting in bike lanes, they're doing the curbing, sidewalks, everything, which you wouldn't have to pay for. You pay for putting your pipe in the street, and that's it. So that's a significant cost savings to you. If we don't line up and do that, and you say you want to come back and start doing your sewers in 2026, you're already blocked out. You can't open that street until 2030 under their current program. We have the same case over here, looking at conveying some of the effluent over here to this Hyannis project over near the railroad track. Main thoroughfare for where the ambulances come into the hospital and everything. They're looking to start that within the next couple of years. So they're looking for, what size pipes, how many sleeves need to go under the railroad tracks and on, because they're doing final design. Same for the Route 28 bridge. They're asking the town now for what size pipe sleeves do you want? If you're conveying flow from this area over to that pumping station, how many pipes, what size sleeves? Sleeve meaning circular opening that you put the pipe through. And what size? So Jeff and I are looking at one another like we don't even know whether that's the route we're going. So yeah, we can give them some rough estimates and we can make it work in the future, but my point I'm trying to get across is there's a lot of timing here, coordination that needs to occur, but if we can make this happen and you factor that into your phasing, there's some significant cost savings for you. And when you factor in that costs are going up roughly 3% a year under today's economy, waiting 5 years is 15% plus.
And I think that's conservative, too. 3%, I think is conservative numbers.
So, I mean, we just did a project here in town and the asphalt costs were through the roof because of the oil prices. So the numbers came in very high. You can't control all that. You look at the tariffs that are proposed, you look at on aluminum, steel, all those things, concrete, all those things are factored into the type of construction that we're looking to do. So you asked, next steps, we talked about this last time, and that's why in the agenda we tried to knock off sort of the first 3 or 4 bullets to have at least a discussion today and start to get your input so that we can then go back and start to continue crunching numbers before we get down into, this is going to be a tough one. But before we can get there, we need to recrunch your costs so you know what the costs are that you're looking to recover. You can start to talk about means of doing it without knowing the final number. The town staff has done yeoman's effort in terms of looking at options over the last 3 or 4 years, and I'm sure they can give you the update of what they've done. We've given you the plans for what's been developed in Harwich and Dennis, which I think are good models, at least to consider. So there's a lot of discussion to happen there.
Mr. Chairman, with regards to the phasing topic here, so to Dave's point, in 2014-15, the staff put in a lot of effort in looking at this phasing plan, and I guess the feedback or advice or information I'd pass on to this group here would be phase 1 be considered really important because it set the stage for everything that followed. So that's the idea of a main pipe, so to speak, the coast-to-coast solution. It didn't do just the west end of town. Now had all the reports showing that we needed nitrogen removal in all watersheds. So modifying that phase one to go from Barnstable to Dennis along Route 28 set the stage for us to at least report back that we're making progress in every single watershed. We thought that was an important point to be able to make. Not just in Parkers River, not just in Lewis Bay, but we didn't want to do something in the western part of town and then have them come back and get an order that we need to do something in Bass River. So we thought it was important to show that progress was being made, and so the way to do that was phase one, Barnstable to Dennis down Route 28, which set the stage for every other phase that came after that. And so Dave, said roughly every 5 years. The phase 1-2 might be quicker than that, because you might find with only $500,000 or maybe roughly $500,000 gallons of flow on phase one, that might not be enough. You might want to do more. And also, as we do more, it goes into our financing plan that we'll be talking about. The ratepayers provide the cash flow to do this. You don't have the cash up front. It's great to say maybe the ratepayers will pay for some of this stuff. Well, they don't start paying for anything until they're on board. And so we need to get them on board quicker. One of our solutions in our financing plan was a capital surcharge as something to consider. So if you're going to do a capital surcharge on a ratepayer, that would presume that you actually have the ratepayer in the works, in producing flow and processing flow. So, phase one was, in our minds, the most important from an environmental health perspective. You're addressing all three watersheds, but also on the economic development concerns, because now you're providing economic development opportunities throughout the whole town. It was hard to say that if you had a hotel in West Yarmouth, you had all kinds of limitless opportunities to develop your properties, but if you're over by Bass River, you had nothing. This alleviated that, and if that caveat is, it's a cost, and Dave and I and others had talked about this at the time, we'd have to go back and get these numbers, but it also allows the offshoot of down in the South Shore Drive area as well.
Yeah, and from past experience also, even though the first go-at had failed, there were many people that came forward and said, we want our neighborhood included in phase one, and we're willing to pay for it. So I have a sense that, and I don't know how you could work it out in reality, is instead of phase 1 through 8, you might have phase 1A, 1B, 1C, phase 2, so on, depending on where you could pick off pieces that are easy to do maybe. And again, start building your ratepayer base as quickly as possible.
And again, that could go into your cost recovery plan. If a neighborhood group came to you and said, we want this now, you might not be ready to finance or pay for it now, but that might be a different financing mechanism that you could say, yeah, okay, we'd be happy to accommodate your request for now, but you might have to pay a betterment or some other type of charge to pay for that.
And again, I think with betterments, I think most people would probably take it, but I imagine there's probably people out there who would probably just rather write the check and be done with it too, for those who could afford to. And that might even help because that gives you more capital up front too.
So when we get to that discussion, we can talk to that too.
Okay. You got that all pretty well covered?
Well, I guess I'd just like, as Rich said, we don't need to decide tonight, but we will need some guidance in the near future of, we have put it out as 8 phases, roughly 5 years. Nothing gospel about 5 years. Like you said, you may do 3 phases the first 10 years just to get things moving, and then do every 5 years type of thing. Particularly if you have to invest in, and you go the DHY partnership route in building that treatment plant. You're building infrastructure that's going to serve for multiple years if you do the Route 28 corridor, because that's the spine of the system. But also, we had, in discussions with previous committees and town staff, looked at different types of collection systems. Again, trying to be most cost efficient. And so while the red area mainly is gravity, these blue areas and the pink areas represent a different type of collection system. The blue areas was what's known as a vacuum sewer system. And that's because that is best used for very flat areas in high groundwater. it's a contained system, you don't draw in the groundwater and this and that. We have used that in a couple locations, but yet on the Cape, it has a perception issue. Provincetown had an issue that wasn't necessarily related to the vacuum system, but the way it was ultimately designed. We designed it to feed into a gravity system. The opposite happened in Provincetown, which created their main issue in that they fed gravity systems and pumped into the vacuum system. And when they broke the vacuum on the biggest day, July 4th, back a few years ago, they had an issue. Barnstable, we had some discussions over there recently. They're trying to not use vacuum in the future. Pressure sewers, we have some pressure sewer areas which has a little more up and down. Again, a contained system, so you're not getting into groundwater, penetrating into gravity pipes. So at some point, we'll need some input from staff as well as the committee on, do you want to continue with the hybrid system? Town of Harwich chose to try to do as much gravity wherever they could, which means some more pumping stations. But feedback from the community and even the design that we're doing right now in East Harwich, we had proposed some grinder pump systems there, which are very common outside of New England and other parts of the country. But they asked us to try to switch it and add another pumping station so that that wasn't done, or dig a little bit deeper in the gravity pipe, so it's sort of one and done type of thing. Town of Falmouth had some issues with freezing, but they just put in 1,200 units of grinder pumps. So it can be done, has some maintenance, it's not just gravity pipe and forget it. But it can be more cost effective to install initially. So it's a lot of those, pay more up front and pay some operating cost, and pay less operating costs, or pay less up front and pay a little more operating costs. Those are the types of things that we're going to look for feedback. We don't need to make that decision per se on all 8 phases. As I tell everybody, try to focus your plan, have a plan for all 8 phases, but focus on the first 3 phases so that you actually start. If you try to put all your energy into what phase 7 is going to look like, you're never going to get to phase 7. So, just
Do you have a sense of when you'll know if the Barnstable solution is going to work? So as we move forward, we know which way we're going to consider
Good point.
going with.
well, we're actually looking at, in terms of the DHY Clean Waters Community Partnership, we're generating the cost both ways. One, if we break this area off and send it that way, or one if it goes over to Dennis. So you'll have both of those costs to compare.
The work that CDM Smith is doing right now is really to analyze the costs associated with that. It's going to become a discussion between the communities, whether we want to enter an agreement with them or not, if the cost makes sense. We should have a draft, or the town should have a draft on report, winter, maybe for that Barnstable solution.
Yeah, hopefully first of the year.
So that would probably be a decision to be made at the selectmen level as opposed to us, I think.
Absolutely, but I think they're going to look to this committee for a recommendation.
Jeff, how is the, back when I was there, we were talking to Barnstable about this possibility. Has that gone forward any more than the last 3 years? Is there any more talks with Barnstable about it as time has gone on? In this case, I'm asking, do they seem favorable to it? If we can take back enough of their region?
Yeah, we've actually, and it's been part of this grant, we've had 3 or 4 good meetings with them, very positive. They want to make it happen. Again, the thing that you didn't have on the table back in 2011 that you're probably recalling is you were sending wastewater over and then you were bringing wastewater back. Right? Now you're bringing wastewater over and you're bringing more than your effluent back, which is a huge asset to you
And
that Barnstable wants.
It offsets the cost, right? You look at it that way, I'm sure.
Yeah. All right, I was just wondering if you were still favorably thinking about it rather than going in.
No, the discussion's been very favorable.
Are there any issues with regard to pumping it into a different,
Watershed?
watershed.
We will have to have that discussion with DEP. I think the flows we're talking about are so small, still recharging into sole source aquifer, even though it's a different watershed. So as long as we account for the nitrogen balance, because their effluent still has nitrogen and we're bringing that over. So we would need to account for removing more nitrogen in the Parkers River watershed, which would be a cost to Barnstable. That needs to be factored in.
The other question I had was, if we went to Dennis as a home, do we have to upsize the sleeves?
Hopefully we're gonna give them big enough sleeves that will make it work.
So you oversize the sleeves?
Because we have other options too, and that's why we're not sure the actual solution, but, you know, a lot of it makes sense to go across and go across, Route 28, Bass River Bridge. But we've also looked at going up and going this way.
No, that was
Two
another,
connection points.
that was another question I had. It seemed like going up High Bank was a better deal, but.
Well, it is, particularly for the northern section. And we will be bringing a effluent force main back this way over to the Bass River Golf Course, because we're looking actually at the Bass River Golf Course as one of the primary effluent recharge sites. It's got good soils. It's in the good flushing area of the Bass River. So actually the town has just authorized us to bring your golf course architect on board to look at options for rebuilding essentially the Bass River Golf Course in order to be able to recharge the effluent below ground for the vast majority of it, as well as use it as the source for irrigation water to water the course, same as you do with the Bakery Hills course.
Are you thinking in terms of putting two pipes in the same trench, or are you thinking about building a recharge pipe going back separately from your force main and battery system?
Where it makes sense, certainly we're looking to do that, but we need to make sure that they line up, timing, all those things.
Especially if you get in and put a gas can and put anything else in it.
I'm not sure that's possible.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
on the draft phasing plan, I guess my, as far as staff efforts concerned, does the committee have any interest in doing any amount of outreach or presenting options for public consumption or feedback? Or do you just want to discuss it here first and then present a plan, or you get feedback on that plan, or? In other words, do you want
I
input
sense
from
we need to know a
citizens?
little bit more. Because I think one of the biggest questions we need to know, we're going to Barnstable and Dennis, we're just going to Dennis. I don't know if the committee wants to have a discussion about, do they want to split phase one differently than it already is proposed? I don't personally myself, but I don't know if anybody else has that feeling that it should be treated as two different things, but it doesn't really make sense to me economically. And from a, again, from that perspective of the Route 28 rebuild, I would really not want to wait till 2030 to do this.
I don't think we have that option.
We do, but it would be fatal.
Is there any advantage, with Mass DEP, like partnering with Barnstable as opposed to Dennis? Any grant-wise or
DEP, Department of Transportation.
DEP?
Well, DEP is all for regionalization, so, you know, wherever you can do a collaborative partnership, they're very supportive of
So
it.
there's no advantage to going to Barnstable as opposed to?
The advantage may come about is when you go to apply for state revolving fund loans, you get more points in that, and, you know, as more communities seek that money, which is either 0 or 2% interest loans. So that's very favorable. You know, the town can't probably do better than 3.5%. So that savings there, that gives you more points for regionalization solutions. Prime example is Howard's just found out they're likely to get 0% interest loan for their sewers. They were rated the top of the applicants this year. 30% of the SRF pool is put towards zero interest loans. So, you know, as everybody starts into this program, there's gonna be more people looking at that same bucket of money, same bucket of 0%. So, you know, that's another factor to consider.
Would nasty EP look favorably? I mean, we might be in a good negotiating position with Barnstable because they need this recharge. They need to get, either come to us or we go build an outfall or find another step to get the recharge, right?
Which they're in the process of doing a study to look at multiple recharge sites elsewhere in Barnstable, but.
Yeah, I think, to your point, I do think that DEP does kind of tend to look at the bigger picture, and I think helping Barnstable will certainly benefit. I don't know if that gives us any kind of advantage, but I think they look at it as, you know, helping in the neighboring communities. It certainly makes sense. Yeah.
So where do we go from here, from on the draft phasing manual to give the staff direction?
It's a committee, it's not up to me.
Well, I
Again,
put it up there.
I kind of voiced what I feel is that I think all of phase one needs to be done. I think we just need to find out, because there's, again, it's going to come down to how much is it going to cost me. People are going to want to know what's the cost differential between going everything to Dennis, but splitting the flow and taking some of it to Barnstable. You know, it sounds like the discussion is that Barnstable may be putting some dollars into this too, because we're helping them with the discharge side of it, which, you know, maybe that is to our advantage, but I think we need to know that before we try to sell it to anybody else.
Well, I guess the question would be is, should we have a vote or a discussion on phase one? I think that I agree with you that the Route 28 from east to west, west to east, whatever would be beneficial on phase one, and then we might have some questions on phase two.
Yeah, I'm fine with it. I think we just, when we try to make it at the level of public involvement, that we need to have better answers, but absolutely. If somebody feels it needs a motion, they can make a motion to support phase one. If not, if it's a consensus, we'll just go with that.
Dave, do you need anything beyond the phase one as far as helping your planning efforts at the moment?
I think we're just gonna update the other ones feeding into that. I don't think the difference in type of collection system at this point is gonna be.
Yeah, the difference in the election system is probably not a huge number. It's a number, but it's not. I would think that if the committee is so inclined to adding areas, that might be
Yes.
something we want to
Right.
consider.
Yes.
That's a cost number. So there is a number, several areas that are not in the plan right now. So if that's,
When you
you
brought
know, a
up,
change and you want to take a look at that, I think that would be helpful, because that's probably bigger.
So you're talking about future phases as opposed to just phase one?
That's correct. But what's in the plan generally will help develop costs.
At one point, phase one also extended down, get the name of the street,
Seaview.
Seaview,
Yeah.
and picked up
South Shore.
all of South Shore. And that, so that phase one extended down here to pick up those larger users and those who have also expressed an interest in wanting to make investments in the very near future.
That makes a lot of sense.
The chairman's earlier point, perhaps, Dave, and I think we might have actually done it this way, I think. Perhaps that could be a 1A addition.
Yep.
So we've got Route 28 from Barnstable to Venice, just the straight line, but if you did 1A and went down to South Shore Drive, it's this X amount of dollars more.
So I guess that would lead to more engineering questions as far as, say, South Street, Pleasant Street, whatever, running along the river. Which way does that flow go? Does it go down to South Shore, or does it, I would think, in a gravity type of arrangement, probably gonna go down there anyways towards Smuggler's Beach?
Yeah, it's very difficult for you to see, but a lot of these, particularly the gravity, they already know which direction they're going, so
Right.
we can feed that in. And I guess one of the other questions that should be asked is, do you feel that the town would add that back in at some point? Because that may impact what we do down here. I would tell you that over in Dennis, you can see these areas aren't included right now, but the guidance they have asked us, the plan that they put forth meets their nitrogen removal requirements and their commercial development based on their recent study. But they said, make sure when you design all of the infrastructure down in this area, that you design it that it would pick up these areas, phase 9, phase 10, whatever it may be, because they know from experience, and I can tell you this is already happening out in Harwich, of the periphery of the area defined as phase 2 out there. People are wanting to jump in now and this and that, that these folks will be knocking on your door to say, how do I get into your sewer system? So their guidance to us has been, whenever you're doing infrastructure improvements or costing things out, make sure that you can add that in the future.
I tend to lean that way because just what you're saying, I got a feeling you could leave these certain sections out and they're gonna say, I'm a donut hole here. How come I'm not part of what's going on around me? And they will want to be included.
That's an example where the scientific reasons don't overcome the perception reasons.
Were there any other neighborhoods, Dave, like other than the South Shore Drive, that we didn't include in the last plan?
Well, I guess one of the things that, and I don't know the latest, but there was a development up here, plus this is the Nicanella development. I don't know what the status is there. That wasn't all included. So I know there was some development there, and I don't know if there's others that may be offshoots, you know, become the 1B, the 1C, the 1D.
You're saying the Nicanella development is not part of
Everything that
space?
abutted the street was, but he's got the
He
property
goes
up
deep
and
to the
back.
pond,
Yeah.
right?
It goes,
And what's that condo development up in here?
Same pond or Swan Pond?
Swan
Swan
Pond.
Pond Village. They had expressed interest back in the original design of trying to connect in, even though we were stopping Parker's River. They were trying to figure out how could we get in, or could they
Get
go
around
over
the
to the
river,
plant,
right.
pump over direct.
Yeah, but now you're gonna go all the way down with phase 1. It's an easier.
Yeah. Because Stop and Shop has to treat their discharge now, I believe.
Yeah.
Swan Pond Village has their own issues. And again, I've had conversations with Lou, and I know there's ideas out there that he may create his own small sewer system if we don't, as a town, do something so he doesn't keep getting stifled in his development, because apparently all his conversations with investors hit that same brick wall, which is where the sewers.
I can tell you from my experience, they would rather give you the money than do their own thing.
Exactly. Yeah, all they have to take care of is grease traps instead of everything else.
They don't want
They would love that. So, I definitely think whatever property is owned by the Nicanella family that's potentially part of his development has to be included in phase 1.
Well, maybe, Karen, do you have a
I have no-
updated plan that you could send us or something?
I have
I
nothing
think his plan's kind of fluid. still,
very
isn't it?
recent from Mr. Nicanello.
Okay.
So I think you've probably seen the latest iteration. I'm happy to touch base with him and see if he has,
Well, I think from our perspective, the only thing that counts for us is how many gallons.
right.
So that when they design that section, then it's properly designed.
I
Well,
mean,
the
we
other-
can, oh, go ahead.
The other part that might be important to us, as the town, would
Bless
be,
you.
if you did that phase 1 in the 1D, as Dave suggested, a 1C, anyone that's nearby, you might have a financing mechanism to get them connected sooner rather than later.
And again, this is from my experience, I remember people involved in the last process in 2011 who were in certain neighborhoods or certain streets and said, how do we get in? They didn't want to wait 5, 10 years, which they're waiting anyways, but they didn't want to be in later phases, they wanted to be sooner rather than later. So I think you're going to see a lot of that as the system goes along.
I would suggest some work be done on a formula. If
a plan that is understandable by the average person who's not in commercial real estate can become understood. For example, right up the top, Route 28, the length of the town, 500 feet north, 500 feet south, with a minimum requirement. In other words, if you want to be in the 500 feet away, you have to be putting in X thousand gallons a month or something, so that it doesn't look like you're picking out this property or that property. You do much better selling something if you can do it on a formulaic basis as opposed to that particular condo or this particular business. And then everybody who meets the criteria of the formula, the full length of the town's got an equal shot at it.
Well, if you went 500 feet to the north on Route 28 between, say, the Nicanello, the Sports World property and Parkers River, you'd pick up everything in there anyways.
I'm just putting it
This is
out
not-
there.
Well, I think the formula was every parcel that touched Route 28,
Yeah.
period.
And then-
Right.
Well,
That's
there
what
might be
shows now.
something, there might, I caution against that, because there might be something that is particularly germane that you want in on the first, if you will, pass, that doesn't touch 28. I can think of a few parcels that are really substantial, just from my general knowledge, that you probably want in, that don't touch 28. So if you come up with a swath.
No, I agree, yeah. Again, and I think the Swan Pond Village is a good example, and the Stop and Shop, the whole plaza
There you go.
is a good example. I'm sure there are others that.
I don't recall how closely the phasing followed the underlying zoning. Did it
I don't
tie
think it
back
really
to
did.
B1 and B2?
I don't think it did.
The
Because
current
that's
phase-
another set of parameters.
The current phase one just was abutting properties to 28.
Right.
It was just a spine to pick up everything else at some, well, almost everything else at some point. So.
But I think
again,
that all of Niconella's is B1, for instance.
Dave, are we at a position that a future meeting, maybe we could have a discussion on phase one? But, you know, not this whole broader map town-wide, but just on that proposed phase and what it's touching and not touching. I know I have a zoning map that highlights all those. I had one GIS do that, but I don't know if you are working from that, if you know, it's just been a couple of years now, so.
And the main is already engineered to pick up several phases beyond 28. So from our perspective, as far as engineering and installation, I don't think we're gonna cost any more money right now to get this done, other than anybody who wants to tie in that may not be directly on there right now. Or actually, it would provide a bigger pool of money to help pay for this capitalization of it.
But I think zooming in onto the map so you can see it a little better might be helpful.
Yes.
Do you still have activity centers that you're looking at?
We have, we have the underlying zoning, we have the hotel motel overlay district, and then what we have now that we didn't have the last go around is our village centers overlay district. So that kind of, what that did, Dave, was prioritize the village centers, for everyone else, what the village centers were kind of activity nodes along Route 28. There was one in South Yarmouth, one in West Yarmouth, maybe one around the Parkers River. The planning board in 2013, I think, kind of refocused their efforts because it was really unreasonable to target development on 5 miles of Route 28. Where do we want to prioritize? And that was the village centers overlay district. So that's the biggest nut that's changed that we'll need to look at. And there are density bonuses in that zoning.
That runs from Winslow Gray Road to Forest.
It runs, yes, it does.
I think the most important thing is we shouldn't be telling people that we're going to exclude areas. In other words, we're focusing on kind of phasing and the most critical areas, environmentally and economically wise, are first. But even when we run section A, we shouldn't be saying, well, I can't see that. We're just saying that it's a low priority. For the environment.
But I think you have economic reasons, and now that you're into a plant with 2 other towns potentially, you have to consider that if for some reason we can afford to be aggressive, and I know it's kind of in the DHY agreement, is that if we want to expand the plant, we can do that, but it's on our dime, more so than the other 2 towns. So is it wise to, and am I correct that the first 4 phases are pretty much handled in the first plant? Or is that not so?
The first phase.
Yeah,
The
that's.
first phase of the plant will handle 4 phases of storage, correct? So that takes us a long way down the road. And that could get flexible as far as what those 4 phases, as far as a gallon count amounts to. And then again, if something happens and we think that our new growth and some other cost recovery methods work out better than we thought, then maybe we can accelerate things too. But I think this is the whole point of this phasing is just because it's an affordability issue. What can we take on in, bite-sized pieces, I guess, is why it's been done this way.
And the constructability issue too.
Well, there's that too. You only have so many people and equipment, you can get out there physically.
Physically get it done.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're all in agreement that phase 1 needs to, we've got to give staff and everybody yes, we agree that phase 1 is something we got to get done very, very soon.
Right. And just to define phase 1.
To define phase 1, what it is, and say, okay, definitely phase 1, so these guys can move forward with what they have to do. And as far as, phase 1's got to be phase 1 no matter what, whether we end up with a plant here or a plant in high end. Doesn't matter if the West Yarmouth goes left or right. The pipe in the ground is our main focus as far as phase 1's, because it's the backbone of the system. So you got to start with the backbone.
And the big key now is to engineer from Parkers River east
Yeah.
to Bass River. Again,
Right.
take into account the crossing of the river with hopefully tying in with the new bridge construction and the North Main Street reconstruction. To me,
Yeah.
actually, I guess those 2 things are first, is get whatever you do under the intersection. So when they build that, we're not going to have a hindrance there in the future getting the rest of it done.
Right, we need to get that designed so we can anticipate. I don't know that we need the construction dollars for next year, because they're several years out for the project, but certainly getting something designed.
Well, that intersection's only, what,
Yeah.
4 years out? 3 years out?
3 years?
So it's not very far.
Which intersection are you talking about?
Right by the Bass River Bridge at the traffic lights.
Oh, okay. There's another intersection that's construction that's going to go through DOT, it's in Barnstable.
Yarmouth Road,
Yeah.
that's huge.
Yarmouth Road.
Yeah, where Kansas.
Will you be able to get in it before?
The design is being finalized, but Barnstable has indicated that, if that decision's made within the next 6 months, they can get pipe put in.
Yeah, we have to get moving quickly on that. They have one sleeve already intended to be included in that project, and if we need another one, we have to do it.
Going over the tracks.
Right under the track.
And the intersection. Because the same rules apply. Once they get the intersection done, they're not going to let you dig it out.
So, moving forward now, we all come to an agreement so we can give staff and everybody a direction on phase 1, right? No, I'm not saying tonight, but
Yeah.
certainly in the next,
Within the next month, I would say.
before the end of the year, how's that?
Yeah.
Look at the potential that we talked about this evening for phase 1. And then you consider phase 2, 3, and 4. It's going to be a work in progress. As you get into phase 1, more things are going to come to the forefront relative to the other areas we've talked about soon. And then, I think with that information, it's going to help you with phase 2, phase 3, and 4. But I think it's just, again, it's going to be a work in progress as we go along. And I think it's a smart way to look at it, too. Because you're open to all suggestions and all capabilities.
Because again, when you talk about cost recovery, we can make guesstimates all day long about, well, how much more room tax, how much more meals tax, how much more new growth, how much in real estate tax, how much in betterments can you know? And then when, if, again, if we say, okay, we've approved the pipe, it's going in the road in 2023, it'll be ready to hook into in 2024, I don't know, pick numbers, but I could foresee development happening at the same time that would be ready to tie into our pipe as soon as we make it active. I don't know how much of that will be, again, they're all guesstimates, but for those, and Karen knows better than anybody, but I know of many examples of developers who have come to town, investors who have come to town looking at things, and they just turned right around and walked away. And, you know, there could be hundreds of millions of dollars we've already missed out in development, if not more. I think they're pretty big numbers.
Well, look at Yarmouth Gardens, they're putting in their own system for 69 units, $750,000. But they're also, they're also shooting their own pipe out there in the sector, once we get the main line.
That's good.
So,
Okay.
Shows you what people are willing to spend.
So I think everybody should just, you know, think about these different areas that may or may not go into phase one. Let's put them all together for the next meeting, and that way Dave and staff has direction on what they need to concentrate on, which I guess would lead us to how much money we need to ask for engineering and maybe construction money coming up in the near future.
Will certainly help, absolutely.
Can I make a suggestion that with the next meeting, we have a big blow-up map of the town, and we see what 100, 300, 500 feet look like north-south, so we get an idea of what we're incorporating or not incorporating by being X number of feet north and south of 28.
Well, I think we could do that through GIS, but I think the question, I guess I'd ask Dave, I'm not sure that a certain radius makes a difference. I mean, you need to access those properties through a street. So I'm thinking, is it more appropriate to do it on a street basis?
Well, there might be people that would be willing to pay the cost of hooking up to the main.
Well, I think if you think about streets like Blisket and Angus and what's the other one near the Irish Village, right? They're not that
Frank
long. They may be more than
Frank
500.
Baker.
Frank Baker's. They may be longer than 500 feet, but you're not going to go halfway down the street and say, okay, 500 feet, we're done.
No.
You're going to pick up every property in that road if that's what we're going to do. So I think we need to look at that too.
On a larger
Well, definitely we'll
scale.
get a map together.
Yeah.
It looks like this is
Yeah.
scale.
Define zoning. Okay.
Would you like a zoning map? Just for information?
So I think we've pretty well gone over the phasing plan for tonight. Village Center and Economic District flow allocations is next on our list.
Just a little background on that. Back
When?
in 2010, 2011, when you were looking at, you started 7 village centers, narrowed it down to 3, I think. When we were looking at the flow, we were collecting the flow off actual use, looking at what's known as build-out, meaning what could be built under your current zoning. But then because of the uncertainty of the village centers at that time, you know, we were adding like 50 to 100,000 gallons in certain areas just to account for that uncertainty so that it was built into the plan. You know, as Karen emailed me today, where are we? I respond back, as you said here today, you're a clean slate. You should use your most recent village centers areas and then have that discussion based on the zoning that's changed and what you envision for those areas as a build-out. And, you know, let's generate a number and include that as the plan as we go forward today. I wouldn't even look back at what we did before. Let's look at it today going forward, because you've got more up-to-date information.
And I guess the other question would then come back to, I think it was mentioned earlier, was accessory apartments. Do you want to include accessory apartment availability in a sewer zone or not, and where?
I don't think you're gonna have that many.
I don't think so either.
No.
But I think,
But if it's a bedroom, it's another 60 gallons design flow per unit. I don't know. It may
I
not
think
make a
that-
difference if you don't have that many.
I mean, one question, and I don't know if you've already discussed it, is do you want to add just the capacity for bedrooms, for additional bedrooms? So,
Yeah, I said accessory apartments, but it could be just an extra
Right.
bedroom too. But I know some people did ask that question. I know there were areas where maybe the town thought it would be appropriate, and other places not so much, so. It's not at our level to decide that, but I think it needs to be figured out if it may impact the design flows of the system in certain areas.
So we can do that, look internally and meet and talk about our build-out objectives, based on the new zoning
Just
and what we see happening. Go ahead.
something to consider on your adding additional bedrooms. Should you desire to request, and it's truly your request, to go for zero interest loans, one of the things that you would need to adopt, there are 5 criteria. One is to have an approved comprehensive wastewater management plan, which we're in the process of updating. 2, you're not under an administrative order, meaning DEP isn't putting you under a schedule. I forget what the other 2 are, but the critical 5th one is that you have to have land use controls to manage to the flow that you have put forth in your approved comprehensive wastewater management plan. Now, that's a lot of words. What does that mean? That means that somebody who lives at 13 XYZ Street in 2016, when the Mass Estuaries Project report was done and they used the water use out of number 13 XYZ Street, that they are then locked into that flow, unless you put in your plan that you're going to allow them an additional bedroom, and then you add in whatever the typical water use is for that area to account for that. And then you would manage to that through your zoning, allowing for those additional bedrooms to be done. But you need to have that plan enforced or adopted locally, and then you would enforce that plan. The analogous plan for Harwich was they're using whatever the water use was for a number 13 XYZ Street in July 1st of 2016 is the water use. Now, that may allow them to add a bedroom because they're spreading out, the same 3 people living in the house. They're going to generate the same water use as 2016. But one's got a question if they go to add 3 bedrooms. So you actually walked into water use under that land use control, under the quote flow neutrality issues, if you decide to apply for 0% interest loans. If you choose to say, that's way too difficult, I got a lot of things going on, zoning, commercial, I want to put more affordable housing, I want people to be able to live in their homes and add in-law apartments and this and that, I don't want to go that route, then you say, I'll live with the 2% interest loans. And that will all go into factoring into your cost recovery plan as to how you do that. But I do want to point that out because that's an important factor of the 5 items. That is the key item.
Well, weren't there trade-offs built in? I mean, you could, as long as your net flow was whatever it's going to be, where it came from didn't matter so much?
Well, that's why I say when we were doing your earlier plan, as long as we put in a 50,000 gallon allowance for, say, this village center and a 100,000 gallon allowance for this, we didn't have to designate what lot, we just built it into the plan. But you want to manage that village center for an additional 100,000. Now, the plans that you can adopt, there is a process that you can go through that's been approved in some other communities where if you want to move 10,000 gallons from this watershed over to that watershed, there's a process that you go through town meeting votes, votes of your sewer commissioners, and this and that. It can't just happen, it has to actually be accounted for. But there is a process that you could put into your land use controls that would allow swapping flows amongst watersheds. It's a much more difficult standard to increase your overall flow. Their whole goal is DEP doesn't want to give you a 0 interest loan and then let you just go allow any growth to happen and say, well, suddenly all the infrastructure they gave you 0% interest loan to go build is out of date.
And then, you know, and there are other people, on the other side of that same subject, that some people want to be able to add on. There are other people who don't want what they would see as uncontrolled growth. So
Yeah.
part of our education needs to include that
That helps
zoning
answer the
will
uncontrolled
control
growth issue.
what the growth is and where it is.
Yes, and that helps answer that uncontrolled growth issue.
So at some point, we're gonna have to come up with a designated surplus in regards to flow.
And
Where that would be.
Right.
Exactly.
Okay.
And that's why when Dennis added their flow, they are designating it for those commercial areas to occur, and so that's been designated. It's not in this residential development, it's in those commercial areas.
Brings forth a lot of questions.
Well, I think one of our headaches is the amount of seasonal homes we have that, and I'm not sure I see the case where it would change back, but what happens to those flows if some of those properties become year-round, especially at a 40+% second home count in town? Does that hurt us? I mean, I don't think, right, but design flows probably aren't any different between a seasonal home and a year-round home. If you're gonna design a system for a 3-bedroom, 4-bedroom home, it's the same no matter what. Would that also apply to flows in the sewer system?
Yeah, I mean, we're gonna design the flows for the average daily flows. So whether, in that average day, you know, whether it's in May or August,
July.
it's peak flows when everything's collected that happen in the summer. But coming from that house and then going into those pipes, it doesn't matter whether it's in May or August or,
So I'm just talking from a regulatory perspective, that if we are using gallon water meter counts, let's say, to decide what we're gonna do, and all of a sudden that house that gets used weekends or 3 months of the year becomes a year-round house again, does that hurt us with the state when they say, well, now your flow rates are up?
it's something you're just gonna have to monitor and manage to.
You certainly have a high percentage of second home. Yeah.
That's why they picked July 1st.
Well, July 25th is the best time, or August 1st, right?
Even more.
That's when it's busy. It's busy. The last 2 weeks of July, first 2 weeks of August are generally the busiest times here in Cape Cod. So, all right. I guess cost recovery discussion is on our list.
I think a couple of us might have some comments, but I guess I'll kick it off. In the packet, there's a page that looks like this. I just summarized some of the things that had been discussed the last time. We had a presentation to the Board of Selectmen, 2014 or 15. And these were the items on our menu, so to speak. And before I get into that detail, though, I guess the way I'd always looked at it, and I think a lot of committees and others that have gone down this road have looked at it, is philosophically you kind of have to decide your approach, I think, before you start worrying about the details. So, for example, it kept coming up that the north side of town is not participating in the plan, yet they're going to be asked to pay for it. Is that, philosophically, are you comfortable recommending that or suggesting that? And, you know, so that, for example, that's a topic for discussion. One might say yes, because there's a town-wide benefit. Water quality isn't, you know, by street address. It's either you have it or you don't, right? Or, you know, having clean waters and clean riverways and ponds, regardless of whether you live in the north side or the south side or out west, the western part, you know, that's all important. So perhaps there should be a contribution from all people. And so then the next philosophical discussion is, well, what form would that take? Is it property taxes? And if the answer is yes, is that palatable to your taxpayers? So there's a lot of philosophical discussions. Another philosophical discussion, and again, if you go up and down the Cape, there's been different takes on this, is what's the desirability of a betterment? Does it make sense? And so one of the things we've talked about tonight, if we did Route 28, there's such a large economic impact. And one example of someone spending $750,000 to get 69 motel units. Housing units, I should say. Does that, if they didn't have to spend $750,000, would they spend, and I'm just talking out loud, making up numbers, but they spend $250,000 for a betterment, which then takes it off the taxpayer. And then how does that fit into the program? So philosophically, as a residential taxpayer, you're asked to contribute in one form or another, but your benefit might not be as great as a commercial property right on Route 28's benefit. They might go from a assessed value or a value of a property that's $3 million that now could be worth quite a bit more. So what's the equity of that? The other issue that we heard a couple years ago was this whole intergenerational equity issue. So in other words, we've got this nitrogen problem that people have lived here for 20, 30, 40, 50 years, and we've all seen the map from 1950 to current about the development of the town. Well, all those people have contributed to the problem, but what if they're selling their house and retiring to Florida or Arizona, and now they're no longer paying for the solution to the problem? And I don't know if that's something you can resolve or not, but in any event, that was a issue, this intergenerational equity issue that had come up. And so one of our menu items here of revenue options was something that could address that. So I guess what I would suggest is, as you think about this, kind of think philosophically, where do you come down, and that's for the committee to decide of how you want to approach it. This list gave you some specific options maybe to address some of those philosophical perspectives you might have. So obviously the first one is property tax, and that would be something where everybody's contributing on the property tax, so everybody would be participating in that financing mechanism. Sewer use charges. Obviously, there's going to be a cost associated with running this, and usually those costs are recovered through a rate. And those would be, people that are actually on the system. So the people that are on the north side that don't have a sewer connection might not be paying a sewer charge, but perhaps they could be contributing through a property tax or other mechanism. If we have a sewer rate, one of the things that we had included in the last financing plan for financing the last plan was we were contemplating adding 25% surcharge on top of a operating rate. So in other words, if your monthly cost was $50 on a normal basis, add 25% of that, another $12.50 or so, as a capital surcharge that would go to pay for the debt service of the plan. Another way of saying that is in lieu of a surcharge on a sewer rate that covers operating costs, you could have one of the next 4, 5, and 6 items, either a connection fee, an impact fee, or a betterment fee, all things that are commonplace among water infrastructure as well. And maybe there's a mix of those. So in other words, especially when we start talking about the flows and how much designated surplus do you want to have and where is it, you can recover some of the costs if you want to go beyond that or provide for that through impact fees. Betterments, again, you just heard the story of someone investing significant dollars for plants on their sites now. In lieu of doing that, in order to develop their property, would they be willing to pay a betterment of a significant amount to help finance the construction of this main down Route 28? Betterments, by the way, we have legislation now that allows us to be very flexible in betterments. So it used to be a fixed rate, and now there are options where you can basically determine the rate you want to charge it at. So if somebody wants to write a check, because you mentioned that earlier, Kurt, a betterment allows you to get it on your tax bill and pay for it over 30 years as the default, and you could have it at a very low rate. So they might think that that's like best thing since toast. You instead of writing a big check, hey, I'll pay for it over 30 years at 1 or 2%, or whatever percent gets set. Or if they're so inclined and they just don't want it, they could still write the check and prepay the betterment. So there's all these options. And in the past, the betterments used to have to go to the general operation of the town. But now we can actually set up separate funds that can hold those prepayments. So the financing mechanism around betterments is a lot different than what it had been in years past. We keep talking about nitrogen removal and wastewater. Well, a piece of our puzzle here is stormwater, and we could set fees for stormwater mitigation fees for those that perhaps have a large parking lot, for example. And that could go into our overall financing plan for water quality. We talked earlier about people that have been here and contributed to the problem, but now may be leaving and not providing for the solution. And so that's where this idea of a local option real estate transfer tax was floated last time. And so the idea on that, I think, was a 1% tax on the sale of real estate. So that when you sold your house and left town, 1% of that sale price was going to go into a separate fund to pay for wastewater infrastructure. That would require special legislation. We'd have to get that through and push that through. And I'm sure there'd be, your local realtor groups and others might have something to say about that and have an opinion as well. But I'm just throwing these things out on the table, the things that have been looked at and considered. We also have what's called debt drop-off. So right now we have on the books, and actually, perhaps we shouldn't raise it because with the other meeting that's going on tomorrow with the school financing, they're using it for that, consider, as an option for funding that as well. So you can't really count it twice, but the theory being we have a certain amount of debt on the books now, and every year as those projects get paid off, a project gets done. So in year 2020, I don't have a good example off the top of my head, but we might be done paying with an old project that took us 20 years. So if that debt service was $250,000, in year 2021, we no longer have to provide for $250,000 in our budget. So instead of just letting that go away, we could reauthorize under the, all things being equal, that if the taxpayers are used to carrying those costs, perhaps you could continue to carry those costs, except that we're going to reauthorize that $250,000 that dropped off and put it towards wastewater instead of let it just go away. And so we could accumulate debt drop-off, and so the theory being that they're used to paying a certain level of tax, and it would remain at that level. And then we have some financing mechanisms. You may hear the term enterprise fund, and that would be a town meeting vote to create a enterprise fund, and we could pretty much design what we want, but the common ones are a water enterprise or a wastewater enterprise, sewer enterprise. You could do combined enterprise funds, and so we'd have to discuss what would be the best approach for Yarmouth. But that would allow us to segregate and recover costs in our financial accounting system and identify them as such, and not commingle them in with general fund revenues. You've heard about Sandwich, and I have here a handout from KP Law that talks about the wastewater infrastructure reinvestment fund, and this is what Sandwich just passed. And so this gives you a little write-up on that. But that gives you the opportunity, similar to the CPA fund, where you can add up to 3% surcharge to your property tax, and that money, like CPA, would go to a segregated fund specified for wastewater infrastructure. That would be a way of funding. So unfortunately, it is an add to your property tax. So it's not on your general property tax bill, but you're getting 3% of property taxes in the end of the day that you got to pay extra. So you could add right now up to 3%, and that would be an extra charge. But additionally, some of the discussion back a couple years ago was, well, in the year 2020, we're all beholden to have the CPA tax up through 2020. At the end of 2020, you're no longer beholden to having it, and so perhaps there'd be, if the consideration was that if you didn't need the full 3% for CPA, maybe 1.5% would do. You could redirect, just like the debt drop-off, you reduce CPA 1.5%, but then you introduce the wastewater infrastructure fund of 1.5%, and it's in total still 3%. You wouldn't have to do that, and I'm sure various people have various opinions as to what they need or don't need, but that's one thing that was discussed. There is a Airbnb legislation which we will be following and hasn't been signed into law yet, but that's a potential funding source when and if that comes to fruition. So we'll have to update you as that plays out. And what you'll see in one of the handouts from Dennis and Harwich, well, Dennis in particular, talked about utilizing solar revenues. And what I would suggest is that's pretty specific, but it could be really any revenue. So any local estimated receipt that we can generate in town, solar being one, we could designate to go towards paying for wastewater infrastructure. Problem there is we'd actually have to find those sources or generate new sources, or old sources that typically are being used for your general fund. So if you were inclined to use one of those sources, we'd have to find a replacement for the general fund. So really what we're looking for here is typically new sources of revenue. And solar is one because, for example, we're working on a land use policy that eventually might enable us to identify parcels that could be suitable for solar in the future. And if we were able to develop those, the revenues from that could be as part of your plan to finance wastewater. Now let's drop it there.
You know, I had a thought, and I guess it would probably require cooperation from the Board of Health in that in areas that may be soon to be sewered or there's a transfer of property, rather than escrow the money to a Title V system, money could be escrowed towards a sewer connection. So it would seem to me any number that was less or equal to whatever Title V system would be to a homeowner, or especially one being transferred, would probably be palatable to most people.
As a transfer tax type thing.
Well, maybe, but let's say you need it, or, you know, you see how many properties transfer now and they need a new Title V system. So let's say that we know that, you know, street ABC is going to get sewers in 2 years. Instead of having those people put a Title V system in today, have them escrow the money, and then in 2 years they can tie into the sewer system, as opposed to putting in a system and then not being happy because they didn't get any life out of that system, they just paid a bunch of money to, and then are forced to also tie into the sewer system.
I'm sure there's some, that we could look into that. I'm sure that has some regulatory impact, though.
Right,
It would be
but I
something
would-
different than what.
But it sounds like
Right.
something that maybe the Board of Health could grant waivers towards. Just a thought, it just seems that one of the headaches that have come up in the past for people is having fairly new systems, let's say, and then the sewer pipe comes down the street and they don't want to give up their system, they just paid a lot of money for it.
Makes sense.
Rick, you happen to recall the meeting the selectmen had with Senator Sear, Representative Wayman, and Representative Crocker this spring, when they talked about wastewater?
I recall the meeting. I don't know if I was there at that one.
Okay, well, I watched it on TV, and they had property tax at the bottom of the list, and they all felt the same way about it. And look at alternative funding, and I think what they had in the back of their mind, because they had discussed the upcoming new schools and the constant overrides for the existing schools on an operational basis.
The DVW garage also.
Yeah, and, yeah. So that's one of the things that I recall. They also talked about repurposing 1.5% for the from the CPA.
So, in addition to that, I was part of, Karen was, and Jeff was, and Rob maybe even been part of that. But there's a group of us that did a presentation to the selectmen a few years ago. And the whole premise was, how can we do this and not impact the property tax?
Right.
Because that was the direction we were given at the time, the mandate we were given at the time is, can we come up with a plan that will finance this without hitting the general property tax? It was gonna hit property tax, because you're gonna have
Sure.
this wastewater infrastructure, repurposing the CPA and stuff like this, but it wasn't gonna be on the general property tax. And at that time, we were able to come up with a plan that, I think, accomplished that over, with some spikes.
Yeah, with some exceptions, it was a couple of years,
Right.
maybe that
But
didn't.
my point is, a lot of taxpayers watch those meetings.
Right.
So I think that was a message that was sent out. My thought too is, I've owned property in Yarmouth for 35 years. I've lived in my home for 20 years. And I don't recall my water bill, even the quarterly bill, ever going up. It's been $21
Yes.
for a tremendous amount of
Yeah,
time.
it's been 24 years.
It's an
24
untapped
years, it's
resource.
$21.
Yeah.
And then for what I actually use
You get hit once a year.
is extremely low as well. So just consider that $21. It would be palatable if you jumped up to 100 or 150. It's 4 times a year.
So this is, that's a good example of why I put enterprise fund on the list here. Because right now, we don't have a water enterprise fund. It's under a special legislation that a handful of towns have. But if you had a wastewater enterprise fund, in which water was a component of the services provided by that fund, perhaps we could use rate, because typically there's a famous case called the Emerson case. You can only charge fees for the cost for what it costs to actually provide that service. You can't pad them. And so Emerson College got sued because, was it?
They
no.
sued the city, didn't they?
Sued the city.
They sued the city.
They sued the city. And basically that set a precedent that basically you gotta set your rates to cover your costs and nothing more. But of course, that's flexible, right? So nothing more. Well, our costs include capital replacement. So in a water enterprise fund, just on water services, if you have a planned replacement schedule or capital improvement plan that demonstrates a need, then you can raise fees to fund that need. So it's not just your out-of-pocket cash costs for that operating year, it's those costs plus capital recovery. But if you did that through water and a wastewater fund at the same time, one could kind of feed the other.
Yeah.
Rather than call
Clean
it-
water.
Rather than call it wastewater, why don't we just call it a water resource fund? And it could include clean,
Clean water.
fresh water and wastewater.
Kind of like this committee, Water Resource Advisory.
Right.
Well, and I know this conversation already started about what you just spoke of, Tom, in that there are certain parts of town, especially 6A, where it's like, where's the leak of the week? So there's a section of town that desperately needs a new water main, I believe, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, they keep fixing it.
Right, so
Yeah,
I called,
it's pretty old.
one in on Saturday that I saw, so. I think that even without the wastewater question, there was already discussion about raising the water fees just because they are falling behind in updating.
We've been
some of the
talking
mains.
about it for 2 years, nothing has happened. So, again, by plugging that into the system, now it's working. Maybe
So-
it's drawing a little bit of interest.
That might be a good philosophical discussion for us to bring you some more information on and for you to think about for a future meeting. Because that's an action step that you could take. And to establish such a fund, we would need a town meeting, some language at an upcoming town meeting to establish such a fund. And it's easy enough for us to put that language together, but that's why I put that on the agenda for you to have this discussion. So not unlike this China sandwich and this handout on the wastewater infrastructure fund, if you're inclined to go down that route, even if you're not providing for funding it yet, you can still have it. We could do that in an upcoming town meeting with some language in an article, provide for the fund, and then we can decide the funding at another time.
Are we still 1 year away from being able to modify CPA? There's a cycle,
You
right?
have to fund CPA fully through 2020. So this year.
Fiscal or calendar?
Fiscal.
Okay.
So this year,
So that's a decision to be
CPA,
made soon.
But if
You
you
could
read the
have an art-
process for implementing the water infrastructure,
Right.
it's almost a year anyway.
So there's some higher level things, an enterprise fund, a wastewater infrastructure fund that you perhaps could do, and then some of these other things will kind of fall into place. But I think it'll be a little clearer. When you're looking at just a phase one of this Route 28, betterments was also at the bottom of the list in our last go-around. Property tax was the absolute bottom of the list. Betterments was just above that. People didn't want to talk about betterments. But when you're talking, but that's a good philosophical discussion. Whether you agree to it or not, you probably ought to have it because we're going to get that question.
Exactly.
This property is going to go from a $3 million value and now they can sell it for $10 million or develop it, or, whatever. So why shouldn't they pay more? And how much should they pay? I'm not sure, but we can design, as far as the betterment program, lots of different ways to provide for betterments.
I think it's interesting, again, going back to 2011, we seem to hear a lot about not doing better. It wasn't from a lot of people. It was interesting how many people didn't comment until we got to that town meeting, and then we had a bunch of angry
That was
people
surprising.
that sounded like they never heard anything that went on for 10 years. But again, at the same time, leading into it, it sounded like betterments was not the way to go, And then we got to that meeting, and people said, why don't we just let the people who are using it pay for it? So you'd have to, it seems you have to either have the real estate tax or betterments. I'm not sure there's
And
enough
there's also
money
a
to do
fine
otherwise.
line between, some communities have split, you have to be equitable in designing a betterment program. But one equitable method that some communities have used is we're charging betterments to commercial, but not to residential. So, the citizens.
Because of the way they're assessed?
Yeah.
Because of the value they're gonna derive from the benefit of the collection system.
Right.
So you just answered my question that I was gonna ask, and would that be based on, I would think that would be based on a zoning aspect of it more so than a use aspect of it?
Oh.
As
yeah.
because if you have a house in a commercial zone, well, they're gonna get that huge benefit just by being under
Right.
that commercial
Right.
thing. But I mean, I think that is logical because the commercial properties are gonna, when they get the sewer, they can, their assessments are gonna, can skyrocket, whereas a residential, you can put another bedroom on type of thing, that's not gonna change the value of that lot as much.
But at the same time, I think you have to be careful, because we know, at this time, I think most of our business community is pretty fragile. It's easy to say, here you go, you're gonna pay this, and they go, I can't pay it. So
Yeah, but
maybe,
long term.
long term, yeah, but in the near future, before they get a chance to, say, redevelop their property and actually increase the value of it, they may not have the money to pay a big betterment.
Another way around a
So maybe
betterment,
you scale up the betterment.
Yeah, exactly.
well, another way around the betterment is through connection fees that Jeff can speak to, I think, a little bit. But, you connect on a lower size connection, but then you redevelop your property and you have all this flow now, so now you need to upsize to a larger connection.
Right.
So in lieu of a betterment, you could charge a connection fee when they do that upgrade, or a combination of the two. Right?
And we heard about that a little bit at the MFN discussion. They talked about one of the communities was charging like a $16,000 connection fee.
Right.
And that's kind of on the high end, I would say. And other communities would be in the $600. That might be on kind of the lower end of connection fee. So that's, as Rich indicated, that's really kind of part of the full menu here of what you like to do. The connection fee has both pluses and minuses. It's a one-time payment versus something that's spread out over 30 years. It also is something that you couldn't take off of your taxes. It's considered a fee you have to pay as like a building permit fee kind of thing. Whereas I believe betterments, you can do that as part of your taxes, which could maybe comment on that. But it's spread out like you're paying your property taxes.
And the other thing you have to consider too, especially at the residential level, is that the cost that some of these homeowners have to incur to get that hooked into the system. Sometimes you dig a trench around the house, sometimes you turn all your plumbing around inside the house, and then send it out, a different part of the foundation, and that can be costly on top of whatever they have to pay the town.
Yeah, the average connection cost to a homeowner is $5,000 to $7,000.
And we had, just informational, the last go-around, the last plan, when we presented a financing plan, was to have no connection fees for residential. I don't think we had any for commercial either, but again, that's something you could split out. So, the theory being, we wanted to make this as simple as possible for the voters to say, yes, we need this, and yes, we should do it, and I'm not gonna be overly inconvenienced. They don't have to go out hire their own contractor and pay an extra $5,000 or $6,000 to connect. It was just all baked into the overall plan. We were gonna lay the pipe down the street, and we were gonna connect to your house, and that was it. And you pay your monthly usage bill, which might have a 25% surcharge on it, for example.
See, that's, again, I think that's where the betterment would come in, because for most people, making a payment over a 30-year span, as opposed to having to come up with a connection fee that has, may be hard for them to get all at once, and then has no tax benefits going forward.
And if it's a low enough rate on the betterment, it's almost free, so to speak, anyway, as far as financing it. And you always have the option to prepay it, if you just want to be done with it.
Yeah, say if the house transfer, they may just want to pay off the betterment rather than transfer.
Usually that's how it's done.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of the discussion items previously on betterments for that first phase as proposed now is that because it's the spine of the system, it's a much bigger pipe than you need just to service those. So you're actually putting in a pipe that's going to service thousands of people in the future. So it's not like you take from X to Y, the cost to put that pipe in and divide it by the people who are then abutting and connecting.
You put them out of business.
Because, yeah,
Yeah.
they're paying for the use of thousands
Their
of people
share.
who are gonna tie into their share of the pipe in the future.
So you need to figure out what their share of it is. At the same time, if you consider how many businesses have paid 6 figures to put a new septic system in, anything less than that to them is gonna look like a bargain. You know, one restaurant we know has replaced their system twice in not too many years, and at $200,000 a pop. I know a motel that sold that was over $200,000 replaced their system, and they sold it. The Cape Point, I don't know what they spent, but they put a bunch of money in the ground just this year. So, you know, we could generate income, or revenue, I should say, as opposed to income, and save them money at the same time. I think everybody would be happy. We just gotta figure out what that vehicle, the best vehicle to do that is.
Dave, have you seen anybody as far as an impact fee? I know it's common with like water impact, water users. But if you have a big wastewater user or provider generating a lot of flow, can you charge a fee over a base amount? Have you seen that anywhere?
Well, that's normally where they'll use the connection fee, and they'll charge based on the size of the meter that gets installed to service it. You know, 5/8" meter is one price, a 4" meter is significantly more. And that's why case law in the past has been pretty much on the water side. And that's why I could put in actually the special legislation allowing you to create the DHY partnership. One of the items in there, that special legislation following off the MFN, was to allow communities, the 3 communities participating, to do connection fees for wastewater, to clarify that.
So, and that just reminded me of something else. So, when we talk about design, the flow that the 2% or 0% loans would work with, you have a lot of flow that goes to irrigation systems. So what would happen if you split those into separate meters, one for irrigation and one for domestic? It would seem, would that not change your numbers as far as what they are looking at, you know, today? Because obviously we're basing waste flows on water flows.
We take 90% of the water flow for the wastewater estimates.
So you're already accounting for
Yeah,
irrigation.
we're already counting for
10%
some, we're
goes to
taking out
irrigation.
car washing, irrigation.
One of the 3 towns had the 2-meter system for irrigation.
Some communities allow it, some don't.
Right.
Some charge different
Rate for
rates.
irrigation, yeah.
And some don't have irrigation.
Right?
Yeah, there's that too. I forgot to bring it up, well, we'll get to that in new business. Okay, so,
I guess the last thing is, this is Dennis's cost recovery plan. So how they did it, it's kind of an overview, but basically the meat and potatoes is this stuff that we're gonna decide.
Yeah, but in the back of that section, just to point out, there is some good discussion on some of the pros and cons of some of the options that they didn't even select, but it does give you a menu of things to think about. The overwhelming factor in there is people wanted to make sure that things were tax deductible. That was the #1 theme there, which favored the tax rate, which I know is not on the top of the list here in Yarmouth. Just passing along information as to how that gets selected. Betterments are not tax deductible.
And honestly, even that's changed just in the last year because of the new tax bill that was recently enacted by Congress. People in high tax states can only deduct state and local property taxes over a certain level, up to a certain amount now. So the deductibility of property tax is in question now, in places like Massachusetts and New York and California.
all right, do we have any committee member and staff updates? We pretty much updated everything else.
Well, the only other thing that you have in the packet, which I don't know if Dave has any comment on, but this is the status of the latest draft of the DHY partnership agreement. And the committee is meeting, is it every other Friday at this point?
Yeah, actually, there's a meeting this week, right?
Thursday.
Yes, Friday morning.
Friday morning.
And that's where they're hashing it out. This is where it stands. Is the proposed discussion now, I think, is focused on a couple areas. Do you recall, can you speak to those, Dave, or in the?
Well, there's been some changes made based on good input and discussion from the subgroups. What's happening in the or in the month of November is actually meeting with different committees or subgroups that have been formed, subgroups formed within communities, such as Yarmouth has formed a subgroup. Kurt was there last week along with Norm Holcomb, Mike Stone, and Ken Muddy, looking at your selectmen finance committee. But I think they're reaching out to others too for input on this. A couple of the recent changes is the makeup of the commission has been expanded to 7 members instead of 5, being 2 members from Harwich, 2 members from Dennis, and 3 members from Yarmouth. Fresh member of the commissioners would oversee the partnership, working with an executive director who would do the day-to-day operations. I think pretty much everything else falls in line. The budget process has been expanded a little bit to address the ability for people to have input to the budget. It follows a couple of the school agreements that we looked at, and that is that the commissioners would have to adopt a draft budget by November 1st of the previous, or the upcoming fiscal year. Send that out to the member towns, so the finance committees, capital outlay committees, selectmen would all have that information. They could then request that the commissioners come and give them a presentation on that budget that's draft. That draft budget is adopted in a majority vote of the commissioners. So they make those presentations. And then by January 15th, they would make whatever modifications to the budget based on the input they received from residents or different committees from the towns. And they would then need to adopt a final budget, but that requires a 2/3 vote of the commissioners. And at those meetings, a member from each community has to be present as part of the quorums and all these other things. So, you know, yes, they're still a separate entity, and yes, they have final say, but it's been written in to get a lot more public input along the way, which essentially is the way the school agreements and budgets are done.
In my sense from the last meeting, which was in Howard, was they were pretty close on 99% of things. It seemed like there was.
The subgroup has put a lot, as I said, the subgroup has been meeting monthly since June of 2017. So they've put a lot of effort into this. I think there's been some fine tuning the last month. There's a couple new members have come into the subgroup that has really made it. I've tried to address some of the issues that had come up while discussing the special legislation. So I think they've done a good job at trying to appease that and incorporate that into the agreement, saying, you know, we've heard those issues and this is how we're choosing to address it. So we have another meeting in Harwich, is it next Thursday night? Same as what we did in Yarmouth, and we're waiting to hear from Dennis on theirs.
Final update I have is you talked about having some good marketing or materials. This is in your packet, and obviously we'll work with you to develop any outreach plan you want. But at the moment, for now, you do have this informational one-pager, 2-sided, and it is on the website. You know, you do have under boards and committees, a Water Resources Advisory Committee webpage, and this is right on the right-hand side of that webpage. Somebody can click on it and see this and print it out.
Is that on channel 18 as well?
On the bulletin board?
Yeah.
It's not, but that's a good idea.
If you could just put some language in there relative to the meetings that are being held and information available at your office, Karen, I think that would be helpful. Start
And
now.
also, if you're gonna do that, put the website on it.
Oh, absolutely.
So we can do a couple slides for the bulletin board.
If they can go down and pick up some of this information, I think go a long way. Especially with someone like
Too late paper.
So the meeting that
It
Dave
works.
talked about that I was at, he did mention that the property tax idea is not going to be well received at the Board of Selectmen. He said that it was part of their agreement to go forward with the grant, that whatever happens doesn't include property tax. I'm not sure we can get away with, there's a way around it, but just so we know that could be a little bit of hiccup going forward. I meant to bring something that I cut out of the Globe, and it talks about apparently some regulation that's banning the phosphate in the fertilizer now. So I'll bring that in and get copies and send them out to everybody. So I don't know if that's something the Health Department / Board of Health would be willing to act on or not, but it'd be interesting to get some more information on that also.
The new fertilizer regulations were actually passed a couple years ago, and unless you're using starter fertilizer, there is no phosphorus in the fertilizers you buy now.
It's already been
Yeah.
addressed, okay. I'll have to look at what I buy and see what's what.
Yeah, I don't use it.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I have a couple items.
Okay.
Most of the items I took notes on here were.
You use it, then you gotta cut the line.
But, I'm also Yarmouth's representative
How smart
to
is
the Cape
that?
Cod Water Pollution Cooperative. That's a representative from each community that gets together. We actually got together this morning, and I'll try to update this committee. Each time we meet, the big topic this morning was sandwich and the wastewater improvement fund that they just created. They did a lot with regards to a communications plan and outreach, and that's been a common theme amongst the discussions this evening. And so I suggest that if you have a chance, take a look at what Sandwich did. It's all on their website. They've got a YouTube channel similar to what Rich has set up for us with these proceedings, as well as some other information. Just trying to use some of the media that's out there. And I think some of the things that they've done with their video clips and keeping it brief and to the point on like 8 different topics, everything from financing to the technology behind it, to partnerships, all part of those discussions. I mean, there's a lot of similarities there. I think we all learned a lot by looking at what other communities, particularly Sandwich, has done in this regard recently. So there's a lot of time was spent on that. There's also some support from the Cape Cod Commission that they're willing to help us as we develop a communications plan that might surround that. So that might be another possibility as well. And the other item I have is probably seen some of the highlighting of trying to do as the selectmen and town administrator have tried to do with regard to Route 6 and the bridge and widening and the flushing that would occur if the Mass DOT does agree to replace that bridge at some point in the future, at least start the discussions to talk about replacement of that bridge. Yarmouth and Dennis have both approached, and even Harwich signed off on a letter to the state to try to get them to focus on that bridge, or at least begin that dialogue about the replacement of that. So we'll continue to comment on that and see if we can get some movement in that regard, but I think that's a very helpful component that will help reduce the amount of sewers that need to be added if we can get things like that incorporated into the plan. So I just wanted to update the committee on some of those efforts. That's all I have.
Another thing, not to drag this out, but it seems like from the widening of the bicycle bridge, removal of the railroad overpass, has actually changed some of the channels in Bass River. So it might be wise as that process moves forward also to see if there's a way to gauge what the impacts of that increased flow, good or bad, would be on the river, and see if it requires things to be dredged to take some silt back out of the river anyways. On top of that, because I've heard from boaters that there's a sandbar that's moved, and could be a bit of an issue for some people.
You can't even get to Mayfair Boatyard at half-tide.
Because of the opening?
Yeah. Well, it's just north of the Route 6 bridge. You get 2.5 feet at mid-tide.
It's been like that for years. though.
What was it before?
It's been that way a while, but it's just gonna.
But there's one, somebody talked about one south of the bridge. They live on in the Blue Rock Heights area.
Well, the channels changed, yeah. I mean, you're running right along the land on the Yarmouth side now.
Yeah, he said he has trouble actually getting his boat into his dock because it's.
Yeah, but you don't get caught in the whirlpool anymore.
We'll have to look at things like that, but I'm
Yeah,
sure
March
there's
though,
changes that
right?
are taking place. Yeah.
One more thing on my end is, Mark Forrest would like to participate, but obviously Tuesday nights are tough for him. I don't know, I know we have some meetings already set up here, but moving forward, if anybody is available another night, top of my head, it sounds like Monday would be better, but I don't know if that works for Dave or anybody else, staff-wise, committee people-wise. So, something to think about. I think what we'll do is, at least the next meeting, we'll leave it the way it is. And then maybe think about it at that time to see if we want to go 2 a month, change the night, maybe do one Tuesday, one something else. And see if we come up with a plan. I guess the other thing too is last month I said if somebody wants to contact Dave Young, it's fine. I was told it's probably better if anybody has questions, take it through staff, either it's Rich or Jeff, and we'll let them take it to Dave if necessary, otherwise I feel it's better handled in-house, so we don't give Dave too much to do. Other than that, I don't have anything else.
With the holidays coming, I didn't know, and again, this is up to the committee, but if you do want to meet more frequently, I didn't know if you wanted to try and meet November 27th, because then Tuesdays you're going to start to run into the holidays at the end of December.
Christmas and New Year's, we'll think Tuesday.
So if you're looking to increase frequency, I don't know whether that works on people's schedules or not, but it is open on ours.
27th would be a Thursday night?
It's a Tuesday.
November 27th is a Tuesday.
Oh,
2
no,
weeks from
another
today.
wrong month, sorry about that.
That works for me.
And I guess the question would be, if December's kitchen Tuesdays, if you can't change the day in December, I mean,
Well, I think, I'm gonna,
at least once.
do you think November 27th, they probably wouldn't have a meeting because of the holiday?
I can check.
The day after Thanksgiving usually is you used to stay in town hall, right? Most people take the day off.
Town hall's closed, the day after Thanksgiving.
They close it, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, that
So
Friday.
that-
That's the 22nd, right?
Do you have the agenda?
There's no meeting scheduled right now, as of right now, for the selectmen on November 22nd.
so, maybe that would work.
And that might be helpful to, because one of the issues we have, it's what you see down here, to be determined on location. Originally, this was scheduled for the hearing room at Town Hall, but we got kicked out. So we're back here. We're thinking that maybe the conference room A in Town Hall, that would be very tight. But if we had to, we could try to get that. So we just don't have a lot of meeting spaces, and that's why that this date is the second Tuesday of the month seemed to work out, because that would, you know,
I'm fine with it. I mentioned it because Mark would like to participate. I would love to have him here as a vehicle between us and the selectmen, the Board of Selectmen, so he could help bring things back and
so
forth.
I'll go and I'll look at the selectmen's meeting dates and see how these line up.
And then, so, yeah, because like tonight, they normally wouldn't have met, but
Right.
because of the school issue and some other things, they wanted to have a meeting.
It's too bad some of these meetings, our meetings, couldn't be held at the meeting room and be televised, because I think that's, going forward, would be a big plus for
That'd
us.
be key, yeah.
Big plus.
You might be
Are you
able to meet at
suggesting
Bridgewater
November 27th?
on Mondays.
Dave did, so if, I think it'd be a good idea, because I think, two things, I think we need to start solidifying some things like what we think phase one should be. I think we need to figure out maybe what our marketing plan should be, and when we do certain, maybe set timetables. And I think in the not too distant future, we should be planning a meeting with the selectmen, so that we're not going in a totally different direction than what they think we should be doing.
When's the deadline for phase one, where once we agree to go forward with phase one, we can't have any additions to it? We talked about several issues.
Well, I think that's mostly an engineering, no, it's not really an engineering question though, is it? Just because you said, like Dave said,
It's getting ahead
the
of
Barnstable
DOT.
Dennis thing is just about where does the force mains go?
Okay.
We still have the same size pipe, we plan on connecting the same amount of customers, so those things don't change, but we need to remember that the only part of it that was engineered was from Parkers River West.
Right.
So Parkers River, Bass River, the intersection and the bridge, in my mind, all need to be
Sure.
dealt with soon.
So that can be handled after the fact. work in
But I
progress.
think from a money perspective, we need to figure out how to get the money to, A, get the engineering done,
Sure.
and then we can get our cost estimates so that we can propose that to town meeting. And hopefully at that point, we have some idea of a cost recovery plan that everybody could agree to also. So, it's unfortunate we started this so late in the year, but I don't know if there's anything we can do for May, if we should do for May. I'm just thinking that, again, the bridge and the North Main Street intersection, I don't know if that's that time critical, that's this year, or can be pushed out till next May. I
Right,
don't
well,
know.
I think it's likely we'll have a wastewater ask at town meeting, it's just what the magnitude will be. Is it similar to the last couple of years where it's been 200,000 for design and continued wastewater planning? Or is it some bigger number that includes something else? That's something we're still gonna work through.
But that, I believe, the last time, though, wasn't that, the last number, the big number was like $3.1 million for engineering?
It would be a big number to finish, well, I'll let Dave comment on that.
Yeah, no, that was the phase one design, yeah.
So it seems like we need a design number similar, I don't want to say similar to that, but on the same scale, because you have, again, the other half of 28 that needs to be designed.
Well, that number previously included the treatment plant.
Treatment plant, right.
Well, yes, it's a big one.
So I mean, I guess we need to think about that. Because again, the warrant will close sometime in January, and the selectmen obviously want to know what our intentions are, at least on a rough basis before then.
Right, and it does depend on the magnitude of what the number is and how it gets funded. I mean, the 200,000 has been something that could be comfortably funded out of free cash or some other, somewhat, flexible source. If you get like a multi-billion-dollar number, that's likely to be some other source of
Well,
funding.
my sense is it will be a multi-million-dollar number. But, I know we have a pretty healthy free cash, and I don't know who else is fighting over it right now, but maybe we make a suggestion that part of it be paid from that, if it eases the burden a little bit. Okay, so, if nobody's objecting, we're gonna meet on the 27th, and then we'll, place to be determined, hopefully it'll be at Town Hall, make it easy.
But we don't know that yet.
There's no, right now, there's no meeting, right, we don't know the place, but there's no selectors meeting scheduled that night.
So we can confirm it tomorrow. So you can mark it.
Or we can just kick them out. Okay.
So, Mr. Chairman, are we thinking about meeting twice a month?
I think, I'd like to, but I also recognize that Thanksgiving, Christmas, and New Year's are really gonna get in our way.
Yep.
So I think we need to navigate that with everybody's schedules, who's gonna be here, who's gonna be away, how much we need to actually get done. We need to leave staff and Dave and company time to do whatever we ask of them too, so. I don't wanna meet 2 times a month just to be here, but if we think we need to be productive, then I'm fine with that.
Well, we certainly gotta give them some direction here in the next 3 months.
Right, we need to give them something so they can give us direction, tell us we're going the right way or not.
Well, yeah, right, exactly, especially on the phase,
Yeah.
what are we doing?
How soon before we might have some numbers on what the plant's gonna be? Do we have any idea about that?
We're in the process of updating the treatment plant costs that have been generated previously. We've updated all the dentist costs, and we're updating because all the Harwich costs were 2014. So we're trying to put everybody on a 2022 cost platform, projecting ahead a little bit. So we've got some input from you tonight on phasing, and we'll start looking at updating the costs from the other areas, just the different cost indices and this and that at this point. It was really, what we're gonna look at for phase 1. We'll assume beyond that stays the same for the time being. It doesn't mean it's cast in concrete by any means, but for cost purposes, it'll put you in that ballpark.
Yeah, I think we need to be there soon.
Yep, no, that's the number one question everybody's asking. How much does it cost?
Right, and then we gotta figure out how to pay for it, so people can say, okay, I know how much my check is I have to write. That's what really
That's
counts.
what people pay attention to.
Right,
And
okay,
it's a huge savings, you gotta get it in before they do 28.
yeah.
He's got it, you can't do it any other way, so.
Anybody else have anything? Somebody like to make a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second? All those in favor?
All right.
Nobody's adjourned, I mean, nobody's opposed. Thank you all for your time, as always.
No, thank you.
Last time I went to Washington.
What do they call it?